Yeah. Glad that you could install it. Okay. This week, pause. That's my button. Okay. You open it up for not have a waiting so that not have a waiting room. Okay. No, yeah. Okay. They have to, somebody who is not here. Okay. Each join also as a tool. I thought we'd already done that. So yes, you can join and then let's try the first presentation. Just this one. Yeah. Yeah, right? Yep. Yeah. Let's try this sort of installation. Yeah. All right. There's nothing. Yeah, it is. Once you do this, when you get it started. Okay. You want me to share the screen already? Share. Right. So it's what's that section?
Test. Yeah, I think we're good. All right, everybody. I hope you had a good meal. Let's get started with our just incredible next session, which is focusing on co-creativity. It has some truly incredible papers, which I'm sure you're all going to enjoy, starting with a particularly well-titled one called The Emperor's New Co-Author. Dan Ventura, the sole author, is going to present.
Thank you. Yeah, this paper is really weird. This is just something different than I've ever done before and probably than I'll ever do again, I suppose. But it's sort of a companion piece to the talk I gave earlier, and similar sort of idea being that I wondered if I could write a whole paper using ChatGPT. Could I Could I get away with it? Actually, I never really suspected, well, I did try, but I suspected it would be a co-creative endeavor, I was hoping. So myself and the language model would co-create a paper. And this is what this is about. And the paper that I put in the proceedings, the first 5 pages of it are written together with ChatGPT, mostly ChatGPT in a lot of ways. And this is a little footnote that you see at the very bottom that reveals that fact. It says it's a paper within a paper, but it's really more like a paper wrapped around a paper. So the last 3 pages are sort of a reflection of what I think happened when I wrote this paper with ChatGPT. So the thesis of the paper was to argue that large language models aren't going to be good for co-creativity. They're not going to be able to be co-creators with people because they're fundamentally flawed when it comes to that kind of what's required to be a co-creator. So the way I did the paper is I ideated a bunch of prompts, 25 of them actually. And then I organized those prompts into groups so that they made, they sort of coherently made a structure of the paper. So there was, I think, 5 sections in the paper and each section had 5 prompts, something like that. And then I gave the chance, the prompts to ChatGPT and it gave me back stuff like it always does. And I put that stuff together into a paper and then I ask it quite often as it wrote stuff, it looked like it was saying things that needed to be supported with references. And so I asked it for references to support it. And at first I was kind of blown away at how good it was at that. And then I started looking into it and it turns out it's horrible. And I'll talk about that later, but it seemed great. And at first I was like, wow, this is going to be really awesome. But then it wasn't. And then I gave it the whole prompt outline and asked it for an abstract. And then I gave it the whole prompt outline again and I asked it for a title. And then at the end, then I had the whole thing. I did a proofreading and editing and the kind of thing I would always do with a paper if I had like a student that was writing the paper with me. And I tried to keep a fairly light hand on that because I wanted the essence of the paper to be what ChatGPT wrote, but I couldn't just leave it alone because my name's on it. In fact, it's not accidental that only my name's on the paper, as I'll talk about in a minute. This is the final product or the first page of the final product. That's what we got. And if you look again at this list, you'll notice that nominally we both did the same amount of work. There's 8 bullet points and 4 of them are me and 4 of them are ChatGPT. But what I quickly came to realize is, or at least what I decided from the experience was I did all the work and ChatGPT did almost none. Not entirely none, but almost none. So here are my discussion points, or here are the thoughts that I had as I did this and as I read what I had when I was done. First of all, the paper, meaning the 5 pages that we wrote together, it's not terrible, but it's also not very good. And that's because ChatGPT isn't very good at writing scientific papers and maybe not writing anything of any size. The language is all fine, but it's not a very good paper. Here's some quantitative observations and you'll have to think hard about what this means, but I'll help you. The 507 is the number of words that are in the prompts that I wrote. There's 507 words. The 432 are the number of interesting, useful words in the prompt because all of my prompts were prefaced with things like using formal language, explain. Now that part's not the interesting bit of the prompt, but I had to do that to get the thing to behave kind of the way I wanted. So 432 words that outline the argument that I wanted the paper to make. The 6247 is the number of words that came out of ChatGPT from those prompts. And actually, and the plus X is because every time I gave it a prompt, it would give me back about 5 paragraphs. And the last paragraph was always a summary paragraph of the 4 paragraphs before, and it was completely useless and I threw it away immediately. That's the X. So 6247 is the amount of stuff I kept to start with. 4356 is the amount of stuff that I kept after I went through and threw away a bunch of redundant stuff and rewrote some things that was just too clunky and so on. So the 432 turned into 4356, so it blew up by about 10 times. The 306 is the size of the first abstract I got, which was a horrifically bad 5-paragraph summary of the whole thing. And after working a few times, I got it down to 150. It's sort of like an abstract, and then had to rewrite it quite a bit. And I only dropped 4 words, but I changed a bunch of words too. So 146 was the abstract. Well, that's sort of the numbers look at what happened. This is actually how I started the whole process. Like, this is obviously the dream. This is what you'd like to see. Please write me an 8,000-word paper about the fact that large language models can't write good scientific papers or be co-creative authors. And it wouldn't give me 8,000 words. In fact, most of the time declined to even argue the point I wanted. It would argue the other way and say, well, I can't say that because I think large language models are really great and they're going to be really amazing at being co-creative. So after trying to do this a few times with different prompts, I realized I was never going to get an 8,000-word paper. And so that's when I came up with the let's lead it along the way with a bunch of prompts and put it together. Now, this would be awesome, but it didn't work. What I realized is the whole process seemed, in retrospect, a lot like keyframes in animation, which I assume most of you know what those are. The animator, who's the clever person and who's got all the skill and the imagination and stuff to do what animators do, draws these little keyframes in the animation process that says the person starts here, then they go here, and then they go here, and they go here. They don't fill in any of the details. And in the old days, the intern animators or whatever would fill in all the details, right? They would get the person from here to here and in a plausible way. But all the interesting parts of the animation were done by the lead animator. Now I think all that filling in is done with computers, which is no, you're saying no? Sometimes it can be in sometimes that, and that's extra apropos because that is exactly what I kind of felt like happened here. I gave all these key frames throughout the paper, and then the paper filled in a bunch of words in between them. Those words that it filled in were technically correct in the sense that all the words were spelled right, the grammar was generally just exactly right, but the writing was very poor. It was choppy, it was repetitive, it was immature, it was shallow. It was just not great writing in the sense of what you'd want to read from a paper or anything really. And part of that could have been my fault in the way I prompted it, asked for formal language so it sounded like a paper, but it was really not very good, even though it was technically, correct English. I already mentioned this, but the references are terrible. They're terrible in the sense that, well, in the very worst sense they could be. I had 23 references. I didn't put any references in the paper that I came up with myself, even though there were places where I felt for sure this reference belonged to. I just only used references the paper gave, or the system gave me. I didn't use all the references it gave me. I didn't always use them right where it seemed like it wanted to put them, but I mostly did. 23 references, 6 of them were real. They're actual references, real papers. A couple of those 6 were the paper I would have thought it should have picked. So that was actually a little bit surprising and useful, but also worse than being wrong all the time, because now you think, oh, it kind of knows what it's talking about. But 17 of the 23 were totally fabricated in one way or the other. Sometimes they were totally made up. Sometimes it was more subtle, like the author was a real person, or the venue that they were supposedly published in was a real venue. Sometimes they were very close to an actual real reference in the venue and the person's name, but they were wrong. a lot of made up URLs. It's stunningly confident in its ability to give you references, but they're wrong. That's discouraging. And the same thing with facts too. There are facts in the paper that it produced to support its arguments, which were also wrong. I suspect some of this is going to get fixed as these systems get more mature. This isn't the real problem here. It is just a problem right now. There were some positives. I thought it was kind of cool to see the paper spring into existence almost immediately after I came up with the prompts. It's kind of like watching a crystal garden grow when you're a little kid. It was kind of fun. And it does take the burden away from generating all the words yourself to start with. So that was kind of cool. And it's really good at titles, it turns out. I thought I'm actually going to use this in the future because I'm bad at coming up with titles, and it was really good. Once I gave it a little bit of prompting and the paper outline, it came up with enough titles that I had trouble picking which one I should use. Enough good titles. And the one we used it came up with. I never would have thought of it, even though it's perfect. There's a lot more negatives, though. The writing I told you was very bad. I had the experience of babysitting somebody that didn't know how to write it at all. It was completely the opposite experience of a co-creative process you would have with a colleague or a student that has ideas that are maybe the same as yours or different than yours, and you argue and you challenge each other and you go back and forth and you change the way you think based on what they think. There was nothing like that. It was a lot of babysitting and it was painful. The references I already told you about were bad. The longest amount of time I spent on the whole paper was trying to track down the references and verify if they were right or not. And mostly they weren't, and that was kind of a pain. I think the way to sum it up is the system as it is right now. I think all of these systems are superficially sophisticated, but fundamentally superficial when it comes to something like writing a paper. And I kind of just want to leave it there. I have a couple other things I want to say about that, just to wrap it up. One of them is, I think this is a real, well, I'll end with that. One thing that was sort of a side thing that I thought was interesting is if this paper was essentially 432 useful words blown up to 4,300 words, all with filler or non-key frames, I wonder if there's some of that happens in our own writing. We write a 10-page paper. Is it really a 10-page paper, or is it a 2-page paper that got blown up to 10 so it fit nicely in the proceedings? I don't even know what that question means or how to answer it, but it's real front and center when you do this kind of a process. The other thing that I think I'll end with is there's a lot of talk in the media right now about AI Armageddons and the end of the world and how this end of humanity is coming potentially with these AI systems. And I won't discount the possibility that that could be a thing, but I think it's way more likely, based on this experience and others that I've had with these models, that while we're at the top of a wave right now, we're likely to fall down the other side and hit another AI winter. I think we're way more likely to have that happen than to have the world end because of these models, as good as they are at what they do. And that fact, I think, leaves open a lot of possibility for us as a community to try to make these models more co-creative than they ever will be the way they are right now. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much. Now we have questions.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. I wanted to ask why you think that it's going to get better at bogus references and facts.
At references?
Yeah.
Oh, well, because I think there's a lot of work people are doing right now to try and integrate symbolic knowledge into these kind of systems. And at least it can't possibly not get better than it is right now, because it could at least look up real references and give them to me, even if they're arguably not the right reference or something, right? That's a whole another level of goodness. but at least not generating bogus facts and references is going to happen down the road as we get better in integrating symbolic knowledge into these kind of systems. I have to imagine that's at least going to happen.
Sure. Thank you.
Yes, so you said that you felt that you did all of the work and GPT did none. So the thing I'm asking is it possible that this is because you have some kind of insight to the workings of these systems, and for people that don't have this kind of insight, they might feel that they actually did none of the work and the language model did all of it. And I feel like, do you think it's important to recognize that how the skills or knowledge of the user affect how they use these systems?
That's a good point. And I don't want to say that I did all of the work. I mean, ChatGPT generated 90% of the words, give or take. I tweaked them a lot, but to me, that's the least important part. And you're right that if you don't understand what the system's doing, I think more than not understanding what the system's doing is not understanding the whole process of writing a paper, maybe, is when people would think they didn't do any of the work. I can't imagine anybody that writes would think that putting the words on the page is the hardest part or the most of the work. Most of the work is thinking about what do you want to say and how should you say it in a way that's meaningful. And then getting the words on the paper is also hard, but it's the last bit, I think. And so I think more than understanding what the systems are doing or not is understanding what you are doing or what the process that you're trying to do is maybe more important.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the talk. I know you mentioned that some of the fault could potentially be in the prompts that were used. I'm curious to know if there was any exploration or effort in editing the prompts to yield a better result.
Yeah, there was a little bit. That's a good question. And actually, there's a URL in the paper that points to all the raw data from this. It's just dumped up on a Google Doc somewhere. I, in retrospect, don't think I did. I mean, the point wasn't to do that. So I did some of it, but I got fairly quickly honed in on what kinds of prompts gave me stuff that looked usable. And of the 25 prompts that I wound up using, I only changed 3 of them because they were giving me bad results. And there was also, out of the 25 times, only 3 times where I had to give the same prompt again because I felt like I was in the ballpark, but it didn't do a very good job. So it did a reasonable job of giving you something that looked like it would work with the prompts, and it was kind of the thing that you wanted. It wasn't that those little blurbs it gave you were so terrible in and of themselves, but put together into this big piece, there was a lot of redundancy and a lot of weak writing that was, it seems like it would have been hard to solve most of those problems with the local prompts, but there's probably things I could have done to make it somewhat better, I suspect. And I didn't try other language models, for example. There's a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of things that could probably improve the process to some level. Good point.
Final question here.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Yeah, one of the things I was thinking is about collaboration and how discussing ideas. Since you had the final word, do you think that changed your perspective? Because most of the times in collaboration is about arguing what is your point of view. For example, if you changed something and ChatGPT would be like, no, I use this word because I think it's more. Do you think that would change your perception?
That's a great question. And it's certainly a little bit asymmetric in the sense that I absolutely do have the final word and there's no getting around that. That being said, first of all, I tried to be lazy. Like I really wanted the system to do more of the work than it did. So in that sense, I feel like I gave it a really fair shot. I feel like I tried to hope that we would have some kind of interaction where it would write something that would make me change some prompts, right? There's that question about changing prompts. I never changed a prompt because of something the system did where I thought, oh, that's different. I might need to go a different direction. It was only because the system gave lousy output that I would tweak a prompt. And so I was actually trying to kind of hope and look for that. And maybe I don't understand the process of interacting with these models in a way that could engender that kind of thing yet. But really my thesis is these models aren't capable of moving the needle in that way. Like I want that to happen, but I don't think they're capable.
Hey, thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you.
Our next paper talks about prompt engineering. Who here has not gotten frustrated by the just incredible amount of hyper focus on prompt engineering recently? So I was really thrilled to see a paper that starts with the words beyond prompts. So we have here Jiyu Lin to present it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zio. Thanks for being with me today. And along with my colleagues at Georgia Institute of Technology Entertainment Intelligence Lab, I would like to present Beyond Prompts, exploring the design space of mixed initiative co-creative systems. This talk will be organized in by answering three questions. Why studying mixed initiative co-creative systems? What and how did we explore this question, and what did we find out, and what are the implications? Anyways, now let's look into why we study mixed initiative co-creative systems. So first, we already know, everyone knows here, like we're already talking about that. Creative AI can already create human-like artifacts. I throw that sentence into DALL-E, and this is what I get. A bunch of those with spike heads. You probably would imagine that this is not what is in my mind. So the question here is, how could human communicate with AI? So of course, we've already talked about prompts. We also have control knobs out there. And the question would be, the next question would be, are they human-centered? If we think it deep enough, we realize that these are basically methodologies that is tuned towards the model instead of being human-centered. And we do have alternatives. We have mixed initiative, we have co-creativity out there. And too long don't read. These are basically how we describe how a human initiative and a computational initiative cooperate towards shared goal. And we do have research in the field that had promised this method to reduce human cognitive load, make people more likely to use the system, and make the system more casual, more enjoyable, and a lot of other benefits. So let's dig into that. Now, because we have just talked about prompts and control knobs, we do have other things if you really think about it. Let's say, for example, we can have an alternative showing on the screen. We can have a reflection on what we already provided. We can also have high-level planning. We can also have things like visualization above, just text. And remember that these are all two-sided. Both human and AI should be able to do that. We have so many of these. Now the next question is, do the choice matter? Let's dig into that. What and how did we explore this question? Our focus are on communications, which is a formalization we made in some previous work related to basically exchange of creative intents. So basically, as I recall, we were basically talking about things, not just about essentially a local intent, like a prompt towards a sentence. It can also be a high level planning scene where you talk about like in the whole scope. Like, for example, we just talk about a paper. It can be the whole topic of the paper or something like this. Now, based on this formalization, we ask, how does the availability of different means of communication affect the creative experience? Now we have set the stages. We built a specific implementation of mixed initiative co-creative system frameworks, where we utilize our previous work called Creative Wind, which builds on a domain of storytelling, where a human and AI collaborate to create a story, where the AI utilize 3 different models. I think I need to correct this. We have GPT-J, we have an additional modifier frameworks that we developed that adds a modifier that allows the additional topic control capability at a high level, which is another 1 billion parameter model, and also CARP, a third 1 billion parameter model that provides reflection capability, like pointing out a sentence that basically relates to a critique that human can provide. Based on this system, we conducted a human subject study asking these 2 questions, basically asking these 2 questions: how the presence or absence of different modes of human AI collaboration, communication affect perceptions, and what is the individual variable that changes them. We conducted a study with 185 participants from Polyfric. So talking about the study, we start with some background questions, and we have a tutorial for the participants. We then ask them to they basically ask them to try both a force system and an ablation system, which we'll come back to this later on what they actually are. And then after they finish using the 2 systems, we ask a question related to, based on creative support index on preference towards either of the system. And then we also collected some free-form feedbacks on some specific aspect of of what they had just tried. So let's jump into the pre-study questions. So we ask it, because we are looking into a storytelling domain, and additionally, we are basically contextualizing lists in a game development setting where they essentially develops events for game. We ask them their background in basically using computer to create things, creating game contents, and furthermore, their familiarity with AI technologies nowadays. After that, we presented a text tutorial for them to get familiar with the system. And then they jumped into basically the systems that have different kinds of communications. As we have just shown, the communication frameworks that we provided have multiple dimensions. Here, we specifically pick 3 dimensions that we want to try. So 2 to the power of 3 is 8. So we have 8 different kinds of communications, which is the way to exchange exchange the intent of creating things from both from human and AI, who takes the initiative, whether this communication is exchanging things related to the whole story or parts, a small part of it, and also whether it's an elaborative or reflective intent, either based on the previous things or completely new. So as we already have 8, we call such a system with all these communication options as the force system, where we also built ablations where we essentially removed one side of one specific dimensions. So for example, here we have we asked the participant to basically use both the force system, which contains all 8 communications that we provided, comparing to, for example, in this example, the agent initiative version of the system, where all the human initiative options are removed from this experimental system. And all the participants are given 12 interactions for the system, and they are shown the system in random order. So either they get a full system first, or they get the ablation system first. Once they finish using these two systems, we ask 7 questions, where 6 of them is based on the creative support index, based on the ones that applies to the system, while we ask the 7th, which is about basically the quality of the generation. And we also collected free text feedbacks on the perceived difference between these two systems. Remember, the only difference between these two systems are one have less communication options. So now we have described the study. Let's talk about what we found out. The first thing we look into is, of course, what is the creative background of these participants? We actually, the only criteria that we used for selecting the participant was that they have English as a fluent language. And we were actually able to collect participants with a good diversity. And we can, as we can see, we don't have this, the content of these questions for reference because of the limitation of how much I can put onto the slides. But we do see that they come from different kind of creative background. They have different level of knowledge of using the computer to create things. They have different level of game dev experience. They also have different level of knowing what AI is. And one thing that I want to highlight here is that we found out that there are substantial differences between most of the groups on their preference towards either of the system. So here you are seeing the percentages of these participants favoring the full system. And we see a difference between most of the groups. So the first recommendation we want to make here is that these mixed initiative co-creative tools should be customized to different types of users with different level of creative expertise and AI familiarity. Let's jump into the second part. Now we are looking at these participants as a whole and looking into how they respond to different creative support index questions. And we found a general preference towards the so-called full system, which has more communications, just to recall. What is interesting here is that if you look at the final question, which is about the generative quality of what AI gives in this loop, we actually see preference on the full system, despite this full system, along with the ablations, are all using the same GPT-J system and some other companion models. Which means that we are able to, in these systems with more kinds of interactions, allowing more ways to interact, interact between different parties, they are able to at least create a perception that they are better at completing the task. So the second recommendation we make is that we should consider building these systems with a wider coverage of the design space of user AI communication types. Finally, we also look into the creative support index itself and look into how these questions, how the answers to these questions are correlated. And we do found correlation between all the questions and also the question of, with regard to the generation quality, meaning that creative support index do provide an internal consistency as it is used, it is designed to measure basically the quality of the creativity collaboration. But we also found an interesting, stronger correlation on essentially things like expressiveness, enjoyment, collaborativeness, and immersion, which we summarize that as focusing on enjoyable experience can make them seem to be more immersive, expressive, and collaborative too. The final thing we want to talk about is the qualitative part of the study. Recall that we collected how people think about the difference of these, basically the difference between these different, these models. And from what we see, we realize that personalized explainability is something that we favor. We do have a lot of things that we won't be able to cover in the time, so check our paper. And we do have limitations here. We do have more dimensions to study, we also know that, we are not making like a fully, AI initiative systems are not yet making decision-making capabilities. They don't probably have it yet now. And finally, this is GPT-J. This is not ChatGPT. This is not GPT-4. So we do know that there are more things to look into, but we do have an outlook on thinking about how this system should take their decisions and be customized to the humans. And eventually, it's more or less about how human and AI both go towards their common goal in ways to collaborate. So yes, there are a lot of things we found out, and the key finding is that we want to go beyond the prompts. So thank you so much. That's my great colleagues working with me and my whole lab. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really great work. Are there any questions?
Yeah, it was a great presentation, great work. Yeah, so there was one thing I was thinking about. Did you approach intrusiveness? So, for example, there are some people that when they are focused on a task, they don't want to be asked something because they're thinking or something like that. And this kind of mixed initiative can kind of mess up with their flow. Have you looked at that? Do you have any idea how to approach that?
Yeah, that's a great question regarding essentially how different people would think about, an AI initiative breaking up their process. And we do think this is what we observe when it comes to basically the difference between the difference on preferences between people with different level of expertise. But I definitely understand that that's definitely not covering that. But then if we are going a little bit step further, then we realize that first, our full system is not really getting 100%, not even 90% preference, meaning that there are definitely, space to improve, just like what you mentioned, especially since our system do have a tendency of essentially providing us, an option, because that's basically in the loop. You select an option, you do something, then you get another option, just like, all the dialogue system nowadays. But yeah, I would say that the future work that we want to really consider on that front is to make AI know that, hey, that person needs some time thinking, so we should probably not do something. It's definitely a decision process that we need to look into.
Wonderful. There's time for one more question.
Thank you. If nobody else wants to ask a question, I will. So I have a specific question about the results. So it was 10% roughly on average, the full system was preferred. My question is, were there cases where there were particular individuals who preferred one of the ablative systems instead?
Yes, that's a great question. I really wanted to include this, but due to the time constraints, we were not able to talk about individual ablations. And if you look more careful onto this table, you will realize something that we have discussed in the paper, where we do see difference between different ablations, meaning that removing certain dimensions from this system causes more trouble than others. So for example, a good example here is that we do observe that if we remove the human initiative part of the system, meaning that the system is like, okay, here's an option, you take it or you don't take it. Then we do see that, we do see a reduced preference over these kind of systems. So I would actually definitely say that, there are more things to look into for these specific, dimensions, but also this opens an interesting opportunity for the community to look into more, because that's 3 dimensions that we looked into, that's not complete by any chance. There's way more to explore. It's about, we should look into that. This is not final result anyways.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much again. All right, we have another very interesting paper coming up. It's called Computational Creativity for Your Needs, a qualitative study using a cultural probe for artist-centered creative software development. So, yeah, please come up. Luis Espirito-san. Oh, I'm so sorry. Andre Santos is going to be presenting. Thank you.
Great. So thank you very much. Yeah, Luis is the bald guy over there, the Portuguese bald guy. I get stuck with presenting the work. So actually we changed the title to focusing on artists' needs using a cultural probe for artist-centered creative software development. And yeah, I would just wanted to mention the other co-author, Marcio, who couldn't come, unfortunately, but he deserved to be just as much as we did. So yeah, you know, along the week, I'm sure you saw these symbols, you know, these generative tools, right? They're popular mainstream current generative AI tools capable of aiding in creativity. But where is the artist in all this, right? So what artists' needs do these tools actually answer? Because companies don't seem to have taken this into consideration when creating these tools. So what steps can we as a research community take to tackle this and improve artists in the development process of co-creative tools? It was our main motivation, what we set out to try and do. So that led to these two research questions. So how do creators think software can help in their creative tasks? And the second one, what methodology can help overcome some of the challenges of collecting needs for creative software? These challenges include the fact that creativity is something that cannot be scheduled, right? And the fact that future needs for future co-creative tools are hard to predict. So just going to go a little bit over some of the related work. This is going to talk about requirement engineering from the field of software engineering, where it has been established that the first step for software development should be requirement gathering. And by gathering functional requirements, we are able to determine what are the desired capabilities for a software system to meet the needs of the users and stakeholders. However, requirement gathering for creative systems, it's hard to find, what we called RE for creative. We also looked into the field of human-computer interaction. There's tons of work done here, but they are focused on the interactions. So not on the needs, not on the functional requirements, but on the how, right? There's also some adaptations by Cantosalo et al., Cantosalo and Jordanos, from theoretical frameworks from HCI to the field of computational creativity, but these are theoretical and they do not really involve users or nor do they collect needs. Then there's qualitative studies, right? These are usually interview-based and where researchers actually go out and meet the artists and interview them and talk with them. But usually these are focused on specific systems and on particular aspects, and interviews alone are unable to capture the creative process elusiveness. Like I told you, the fact that creativity cannot be scheduled. So how can we overcome that? Well, that's where cultural probes can be used, because there are a package of tools that can be used for an extended period of time, and they can freely capture the moments of inspiration and ideas over an extended period, like I said. These are also a technique that was developed by artists and with artists in mind, but it's still not commonly used for creative systems. So that takes care of the related work. I want to introduce our guy, Poca, here. It was short for Pocket Artist, and it was the virtual cultural probe we provided artists with via WhatsApp. So they could interact with Poca using any means of communication that WhatsApp provides, like text, video, whatever. And in practice, it was just a phone number that we set up with which participants could or artists could interact and send requests to, right? Now, it is not a chatbot, so it was pretty dumb. It only had like one automated answer, like, I'm sorry, I can help you, but I'm looking forward to help you in the future, right? And artists were expressively told this to not create misconceptions. So it was a mock-up. We were still able to collect needs from them. Right. We told them that to think about Poca as the ideal co-creative companion with seemingly limitless capabilities, even though it didn't do anything, right? So the idea is that if it didn't do anything in reality, potentially it could do everything. So artists were only limited by their imagination to come up with use cases and needs during their creative process. Also, it was something that was always available and they could use it however and whenever they saw fit. So it was able to capture needs in the wild. Now, we know that this might sound a bit too ambiguous still, right? And artists often ask like, but how can he actually help me? To which we would reply, that's what we actually want to study, right? Even so, we also said, if you feel a bit lost, you can ask yourselves two other questions. How can a creative machine help you? Or how can a machine help you be more creative? Yeah. So in terms of data collection, so we first conducted an introductory interview, 30 to 60 minutes with each participant. We asked some general questions about demographics and their views on creativity, and where we introduced Poca just as I did to you guys now. Then they had a whole week to interact with it, where they would request their needs during their creative activities. And then we conducted a final interview that was 60 to 90 minutes. And we would recap the week and ask them, how did they integrate Poca in their routines or not, and consolidate needs that might have not been captured by the digital cultural probe. This, in fact, turned out to be a crucial step in our data collection process. In terms of the data analysis, so we interviewed a total of 21 artists. Unfortunately, we were only able to analyze 15 of those artists because of time restrictions, which still amounts to about 18 hours of audio interviews and 102 direct interactions via Poca. Now, how do we analyze this data? By performing a thematic analysis, so identifying common themes in the data and drawing connections between them, essentially. There's some different ways you can do this. We started by doing provisional coding, which is so we set out to categorize the data according to some predefined set of themes. But the question is, okay, so how do you predefine those themes, right? Well, we first conducted a pilot study with only 3 participants, where we went through the interactions that artists had with Poca, entered the interviews transcriptions which we transcribed with Whisper from OpenAI, and we identified whenever they talked about needs. So we segmented those data, collecting those quotes. Those quotes, we call them units of meaning, or UOMs in short, and they could be summarized into 1 or 3 sentences, and they are reported because they directly express the needs of the artists. Then, like I said, we did a collaborative actual coding. So the 3 of us got together and draw connections between these UOMs to make emerge the themes, general themes of their needs. We did this iteratively 3 times until we reached 9 initial themes. So the predefined themes for which we would categorize the rest of the data. Right, so having these themes in this code book, we looked at the other 12 participants and we coded the data according to those themes. But there was a problem. We didn't account for every need that there was, right? So we needed to do the whole process again, because there were a lot of UOMs, units of meaning, that were very hard to decide. We couldn't fit them into the 9 initial themes we had. So we did another step of open and actual coding amongst ourselves. This led to new themes being identified and in fact, a whole reframing of the data. So many of the themes that were in the code book were actually changed. I mean, what I mean by reframing is that we started thinking about the themes of their needs in a different way. Essentially, there was a division that was clear after analyzing the data, which was between what the actual needs were and the contexts in which they emerged. So user needs and context of use. We also have 3 other themes that emerged that are not directly to needs, but were also relevant to discuss. So in total, we had 12 user needs, 8 contexts of use, and 3 other aspects. Right, so here are the 12 user needs we found. I'm not going to go through all of them, thankfully. But feel free to ask me or Luis about any one of those that we don't talk, or yeah. So these user needs, these are roles that artists felt the ideal co-creative partner could perform in a specific context or situation. They can be characterized by their role's input, output, or behavior. So I'll just go through one in each column. So, for example, the role of the gatherer, where a user prompts something and it gets some aggregated info or possibly from their own repository. Here's a quote from one of the participants. I'm not going to read everything, but the bold part. So something that had already done some kind of previous research for me, something here meaning their co-creative partner. Another example, the role of the variator, where a user provides a base artifact plus an optional prompt and it expects alternate versions of it. So here on the quote, we have alternative stage routes for the same space. The role of the critic, where the input is some artifact and the output that it is expected is some feedback or subjective opinion. So here on the code, give me some kind of feedback of ideas, of concepts. And then the role of the enabler, where the artist expects some sort of continuous discussion to overcome writer's block, for example. So in the quote, I have that, Boca, I know how I can move forward with that, asking for suggestions. Then we have the context of use, so 8 in total. These are the contexts in which the previous roles I presented emerged. I'll go through 3 of them. So here, the artifact development, the context of use. So actually, when an artist is developing an artifact, like writing, painting, writing lyrics for a song, which is the case on the code, right? Writing the lyrics, but not the harmony. So it's while he is writing the lyrics. And the role actually here presented is of the completer. So the artist wants for the co-creative partner to complete what he's doing. Then many of the participants we had were also teachers. And here on the quote, the teacher is asking for Pocket to create some music rating exercise because my student has this and this difficulty. So a personalized reading exercise. So this is the role of the generator for asking for a generative music exercise fitting this context of teaching. Finally, the user context of social interaction, where many artists felt that technology or the co-creative partner could help share their work, but also, and this was interesting, they also felt it was a safe space for them to share things with. So here in the code, I had a place where I could ask all the questions without holding back, without sitting anybody down. It goes on asking like I could be inside that question as long as I want, not as long as the other person wanted. Here, actually, the roles presented are of the recorder. Of course, just a role where the artists would need to record something, some process they would be doing, and the enabler too, because he's kind of trying to discuss some things. Right. Okay. I think I'm cool in time. Right. 2 minutes, more or less. These were the other 3 aspects that do not relate directly to the needs, but were also very relevant that we could extract with our methodology. So many participants did not only talk about what they wanted for the co-creative partner to do, but also how they wanted it to do it. So, for example, Luis was talking on the question to Ju, like what was it? the intrusion aspect of it was something that we found out. The natural language aspect of it was something too, and the availability, the fact to be available. Then this non-necessity is actually a pretty important one. So some participants did not always want to use POCA. And this was important to actually gather, because as it turned out, that is not always the case. Just want to use them. And to this helped us better understand their creative processes as well. And then many participants, of course, commented on the methodology. They actually said that going through this experiment changed their perspective on creative technologies, and it fostered their creativity. It forced them to think on their creative processes in another way, which was really cool to talk with them. But there were also some downsides of the methodology, namely that POCA was, still a bit ambiguous. They didn't know if they could ask for this thing or that thing. And it was underwhelming in the sense that it was annoying, right? He always answered like, oh, thank you for your request. I'm sorry, I can't help. And, that can be annoying. Finally, a week is definitely too short, but we had to do this for a course. So yeah, I'm gonna conclude. So our contributions, so we present a novel methodology capable of capturing needs in the wild, as well as a posteriori needs and non-necessity. The fact, well, I just talked about it, right? And general themes which inform what artists want and need from their current future tools. This methodology can be adapted by pairing the virtual cultural probe with a specific system, for example, or for a specific problem. We also did this for domain agnostic fields, so you can adapt to a specific domain. And then the themes can be used as a categorization framework or an initial way to develop a prototype, for example. We also want to get your attention that we think this is a promising new direction, or a promising direction, I guess I should say, for CC. And we should focus on human-centered design for creative systems, especially because I don't think we, generative AI stuff, it's kind of out of our hands, I guess. So we believe we should research methodologies on how to do this. And with this work, we want to refocus on the artists and take a step towards providing tools for what artists need. So next time, remember to ask yourselves, where is the artist in all that? Here are some references, and here are the beautiful faces of my two co-authors and my face. And yeah, feel free to talk with us and check our paper. Thank you. Also, Luis is going to come up to answer the questions now because he didn't do anything. No, but I'm here as well, right?
Yeah, thank you for the talk. Great work. So one specific theme jumped, immediately out of my mind when you're talking about that, when you're talking about essentially, okay, there's a there is a feeling that these artists think that they can just tell that agent everything without sitting people down, where basically they're saying that the agent do not need to have any responsibilities of talking with the agent, meaning that they think that it's a machinery. But then we also see people saying that, okay, we don't want to use POCA at all times. Feeling that maybe we want to have it instead to be a more human-like collaborator. So there's definitely a conflict out there. I wonder what is your thinking of how do you think the POCA or similar agents should behave? Between a machine-like and human-like spectrum.
Yeah. So that's a great question. Actually, the reason why we decided to do this is basically to go a bit more for human-centered design. And one of the things we believe is that trying to go to generalize and think that there is one only single approach, that for everyone there is a balance, I think it's wrong, and try to not perform the requirement gathering at front before designing the software for a specific stakeholder. It's kind of avoiding human-centered design, because you always need to think what that stakeholder, what that community needs. And so that question can only be answered for specific cases. And once you did perform this study. And that's what we're trying to check. How can we do and what methodology can actually allow researchers to acquire that knowledge for specifically.
Yeah, yeah, this works. So just to add a little bit to that, that's why we kind of, didn't focus on any specific domain. We were just trying to find like domain agnostic things without we didn't do anything, right? We just bought a SIM card and like come up with this experiment. So imagine if we had actually like a prototype, right? But yeah, I think it's still useful to like these generic needs, but I totally get what you're saying.
All right, we're gonna fit in a couple more questions. If I could please ask people to be a little bit succinct since we are a bit behind.
Thank you for the nice talk. I also do a lot of mixed methods, quantitative and qualitative thematic analysis, and so I appreciate seeing that here in the community. I want to probe a little bit more about the domain generality of it. I'm just curious now, looking at these, the list of participants from cinema to creative writing, design, music, painting, photography, theater. Are there any tools out there already that you would say are domain general for all of these types of participants? Because I'm just, I just feel a little bit of tension between the context specific, which I agree with completely. I've also done a lot of interviews with like architects and artists on specific tools. And then I'm not quite sure how that can be reconciled with a domain general tool.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. Yeah, I understand your concern. Because yeah, we're thinking about human-centered design. Once again, we should perform things specifically. So yeah, that's why, in a sense, since we didn't find any kind of tools to address domain-specific, nor even general ideas of how to approach that for non-prototype approaches, because one thing we wanted to do was to have like minimal costs to gather as much information with minimal costs. That's why we went for WhatsApp. We decided to actually make it cross-domain because we wanted to check if this methodology would work for different domains. So our approach was to test our methodology, and we came up with these teams that were cross-domain. Yet, I think for developing, of course, you need to have your stakeholders and you need to define those. And in what regards to general tools that we already have for all these kind of domains, I think kind of language models are pretty cross-domain in a sense, because you can use them in different kinds of domains, especially in those tasks that are not artifact development. Because another thing we showed here is that artifact development is just a small part of the needs of the artists. So you can do a lot with many different tools. For example, just management tools can be applied in many different domains. And the only difference is that in artifact domain, maybe there's something lacking yet, but yeah, that's just a small part of what our artists actually need.
Just a quick follow-up too. So we did all this study before ChatGPT came out. Only like DALL-E was out, and actually we did the whole experiment, and then by the end of the final interview, we showed DALL-E. It was like, this exists. Did you know about it? How would you use it? And then they were like, oh, so this is what you're talking about. And the other thing I wanted to say, I forgot. Damn. What was it? What did you say?
We're pretty badly out of time, and there was one more question. So
Right. Okay. So yeah, if I remember, I'll tell you. Don't worry about it. Sorry.
This is really great. Thank you so much. I just had a question with regards to your mention earlier on about how the study was conducted over a week because it was part of a course. Are there any other aspects of the paper that you would extend had it not been for the course, say in terms of ideation or imagination, things of this sort?
Yeah, so the initial interview was just an introduction to the cultural probe, basically. Then we had this 1 week that they were just doing, one of the things we wanted to do is to let the artists be in their comfortable zone. So we didn't want them to go out, because I think that's where the real art needs come up. Because, well, there's a bunch of studies that ask the artist to go somewhere and use some framework or some program. But what we argue is that that's not what the real needs that come up in the day-to-day lives are. So yeah, we decided to do that, but actually, as Andrea was saying, in the last interview, we did this different exercise of showing Dali that back then was not so known, and generative AI was not a thing, which looks like really old, but it's like just last year. But yeah, so and we asked them how would they use it in different contexts, like if they would like to do something with different domains and stuff like that. So there's still a lot to do, and there's many other ways to do this kind of requirement gathering. For example, fictional abstracts, the workshop, I think it's a great way. So there's more to study.
All right, thanks very much. Okay, now we're into the lightning round. We got some short papers coming up, starting with Kaz. And his paper is differentiable quality diversity for co-creative sketching AI. Looks really exciting.
I will, so I'm going to do something that has become quite a radical act here, which is to try to click on a link during a talk. I apologize, of course, for the revolutionary nature of that. That's the world we're in. Instead of trying to switch around the screen that is being shared, I'm just going to drop the link that I'll click on into the chat. It's a very brief video. Let me just get this actually launched up here in the browser. That'll work. All righty. Let's get stuck into this. I will now full screen. Yeah, no, don't full screen. All right. Well, so my talk here is, I have to stand in front of this thing, don't I? All right. So my talk here is actually primarily the work of my postdoc, Francisco, who couldn't be here for visa reasons, but so you get me instead, unfortunately. And I want to acknowledge that this work was done on the traditional and unceded lands of the Gadigal people, and also pay my respects to them, as well as to the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe, I think I pronounced those right, as well as neutral peoples, the traditional owners of the land that we're on today. I would also like to acknowledge that obviously no research happens in a vacuum, and that this is the work of a large team of people, members and collaborators and of our Designing with AI lab. So over the last year or so, we built this co-creative drawing system called Reframer. And I just want to, in lieu of actually sharing that with you, I think the easiest thing to do is to play this video. Now, of course, I say easiest thing to do, but we live in a wild and wonderful world now. Yeah, we're just going to do this. This looks great. Okay, so we don't need the product spot, but effectively, it is a real-time collaborative drawing tool where the second you lift your pen, it resumes optimizing the position of a bunch of vectors on the screen. You can see we have it set up in a nice embodied way using an actual drawing tablet, and you can put in a prompt, but you are working with it in a real-time collaborative way. So you can change the prompt at any time. You can move, delete, edit, form sort of like your standard pen drawing thing. And the people who work with this can come up with some pretty specky stuff. Get that out of the way now. Now, we did a bunch of studies with it. It's super interesting. It allows people to draw interesting stuff, and it does actually affect their conceptual thinking, as in it comes up with ideas that are then incorporated. I presume my time included the time spent mucking around with that. The problem is the drawings are kind of rough. It doesn't really produce high quality stuff. And what I wanted to talk about in this paper is how to get it to actually improve its quality a bit. We turned to something called quality diversity algorithms. I was going to give a 20-second primer. I might have to cut that short. In effect, this is in a conjoint way trying to make something good and make it different in a recognized way. So you define a couple of measures around which you'd like something to be diverse, and then you make something that is. There's something auto playing in the background. Wonderful. Vimeo's picked something else to do. Love it. I tried to close it, I swear. I was mostly joking about, so we're going to watch the video now of somebody else's. Yeah, get out of here. In any case, so if you just use a vanilla way of doing this, we use something called Omega Mega, which is a very silly name. It doesn't produce particularly diverse drawings. So if you start with this user drawing and you get it to differentiate it, it doesn't do a really great job. And there's a bunch of reasons for that, but it primarily comes down to the fact that moving a bunch of vectors around on screen in a useful way is damnably hard. We need to take lots of steps in the same direction before you see any positive result, and gradient descent's very bad at that. It just doesn't get enough of a signal. So we came up with this simple thing of just getting it to take a whole bunch more optimizer steps before having it do anything. And then it was still wasting a great deal of its time. So we pushed it to only move outward in the behavior space, which we called outbound scattering. Instead of picking a random direction, it would now pick sort of a random outbound direction. And that improved things a fair bit. That's this bottom row here. And now it's still doing fairly similar things. But again, note it is being partially constrained to say close to the user's original input sketch. We're in a co-creative context here. So we tried to then come up with different ways of adding noise. I'll unfortunately have to skip through the specifics. But effectively, we can do better than random noise because we can take out any individual stroke and say, hey, did that make it better or worse? So we decided to add more noise to those strokes that were not helping. And that produced significantly more diverse here. And I'll just draw your attention to one small thing, which is that kind of like weird tail that the system had added to the chair is mostly removed from these because it doesn't improve the chairishness of the final result. We have a computational measure of diversity based on inception distance that I will not go into here, but that if you then apply that quantitative measure, you can see that these different methods produce quantitatively more diverse things. It's early days yet, but we're looking to build this into a more autonomous component of the system where it could actually generate a bunch of useful different things for you. And I will finish by saying that there are some job opportunities in computational creativity at my university. Come talk to me about them or read that during questions. Sorry, Maya, as fast as I could.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We'll take one question. One faraway question. Where are we?
Thank you. I was wondering if you've tried using any of the generative AI models for like diffusions.
So under the hood, this uses Clip to try and optimize the position of things. We really want to work in the vector domain so that we can retain that collaborative real-time authoring. We did try cheating with Stable Diffusion, so generating a target image with Stable Diffusion and then just trying to position vectors on that. It felt like cheating, and it wasn't really able to respond to the user's changes very much. So you can generate a target image and then map some vectors to it, and then the user will move things around and it gets a bit lost. It's just like hard to do that. Perhaps it would be a useful way to get started though, to know the sort of rough approximate structure of the image they're looking to put together. You know, the dog should be on the couch and the couch should be on the floor, and, you know, stuff like that, that our vector system is not so great at. They'll just put dog bits and chair bits and floor bits wherever it kind of happens into them. I mean that entirely. It'll just put things in random places. Thanks for the question, though.
Thank you so much, Cass. Our next short talk is going to be given by Danielle Lopez, who's right here. And it's titled, Can Creativity Be Enhanced by Computational Tools?
Trying to hide the Zoom bar. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Daniel Lopes, and I'm presenting this survey we made to understand whether human creativity can be enhanced by computational tools. And to assess this, a set of semi-structured interviews were made to 12 people working on creative fields, from graphic designers to engineers working on computer art. And 10 questions were made. First, to learn about their backgrounds, their creative process, and their thoughts on creativity in general terms. So what is your work process? Is creativity involved in that process? Then questions for comparing computational and non-computational tools and how these impact the creative process. So which tools you use? Are any of those tools computational? Which of those help you the most in the creative process? In which way new tools impact your creative process? Which type of tools help you the most for enhancing creativity? Also questions concerning computational creativity tools. Do you or would you use CC tools and why? And here to later make a parallel between humans and machines, we also asked if they ever inspired in the work of other designers, and was it helpful and how? Do you approve the use of co-creative systems? What do you think about letting a system creating artifacts without human intervention? Can this be helpful? So can we inspire in machines' work as we do with other people's work? And finally, will autonomous systems kill our creativity or lead us to explore new creative paths? As a result, all the respondents revealed to have more or less the same work process, problem identification, research for concepts, materials, and solutions, and combining solutions to create then a final result. It was also mentioned that computational tools can help being more productive by expanding and speeding up the production of content, and by allowing one to go back and forwards in the development. However, the results may not only be affected by the tools, but also factors such as the way the problem is interpreted and the knowledge gathered during research or in past experiences. We also realized that most people use a variety of tools in their process, from manual tools to computational tools, and that this can also be helpful because it makes it possible to achieve different results and expand the space of creative possibilities. And concerning CC, most preferred co-creative tools rather than autonomous ones. They can see CC tools as work partners, but they want to be able to direct the process and be in charge. However, there was also people finding autonomous tools interesting for suggesting unexpected solutions, and mentioned that machines doing such work may allow humans to dedicate to more unexplored creative problems. Even so, most did not believe that autonomous systems will replace humans, for example, because they're not emotional, so they encourage the development of CC tools anyway. And so summing up, using a new tool does not mean we'll be more creative. However, it creates new possibilities for us to do so. We need to explore the tools and go through trial and error to discover what these possibilities are. Then using our own knowledge, we need to drive the process into a result that matches our needs. Concerning CC, there is this curiosity on working side by side with these artificial creators, but not so much in having them as competitors. However, there was this positive perspective on autonomous systems, suggesting we can inspire in their work as we inspire in the work of other humans. And this way, we may dedicate our efforts to more unexplored problems. For example, if an AI can design a wall poster, designers may dedicate their time to adding dynamism or interactivity to those poster designs. And that's it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. We have time for one question. Any questions? All right, well, let's thank our speaker again.
Yeah.
All right, the next paper looks at what makes gameplay creative, and it's going to be presented by Brad Spendlove.
Hello, it's good to be here. I'll just go ahead and say one of my slides didn't make it into this repository, so I'll just talk through it. But yes, my name is Brad Spendlove, and I worked with Dan Brown to write this paper, What Makes Gameplay Creative, inspired by the deeper dive into the theory and thought process behind a paper that I presented here last year about the language game code names. So the main question that our short paper is looking into is this question of what makes games creative? What are the characteristics of the rule set that defines a game that allow for players to exhibit creativity in playing the game or require creativity in playing the game? And then how can we break those apart into factorize them into more discrete qualities? So the general idea is I think we can consider games on sort of a spectrum from allowing less player creativity to allowing or requiring more player creativity. And of course, there could be a lot of debate about where these specific games fit on this spectrum, but something like tic-tac-toe that's solved and usually not even interesting for adults, we would probably mostly agree falls onto those less creative side. And then games like chess and Go, which even in recent years and throughout history have been described as having creativity to play, or the best players exhibit creativity. And then games like checkers lie in an interesting space, and we can reason about whether they have certain properties or not that allow for players to be creative when playing them. So what are those qualities? So in this paper, we present three desiderata for evaluating creativity in games. The first two relate to the moves that the player takes in the game. And then the third one, which I have listed here as a bonus, is whether or not the outcome of the game can be decided by a highly compressible algorithm. So let's go through these. So first, for a game to allow creativity from its players, it must have a sufficiently large space of possible moves. If you're restricted to what you can do at any given move of the game, there's just not enough room to find novelty or interesting differences in moves. However, if we think about this property in a vacuum, you could imagine a game where you have to pick a number between 1 and 100 trillion, and either you're right or you're wrong. And that does have a large space. There's a lot of numbers you could guess, but there's not an interesting difference in those answers. They're all sort of homogeneous. And so then now we add a second desideratum, which is that the set of choices the player can make changes meaningfully, either over the course of a game or from game to game. And so this is really, this has to do with the combination between the strategy of the game and the creativity that's required by the game. And it can be injected into the game in multiple ways. Like, so a common way would be in a competitive game, having to respond to what your opponents just moved can inject some of those meaningful changes. You're not making the same choices from round to round, or all the choices you're making are not kind of equally interesting or equally worthwhile in the game. And then this bonus criterion is that the outcome of the game can be decided by a highly compressible algorithm. So what we mean by this is there are games, for example, maybe you've played like Apples to Apples, something where you have a human judge who sort of makes a decision about who won, or even something more kind of broad, like a poetry contest or something, where a panel of judges decide which wins, the first prize. Those things are not anywhere in the same class as a sort of game like chess or Go, right? Where given a set of moves in a game, it's just trivial for a computer or even a person to say who won and who lost the game. And so the reason we include this is because although a game such as Apples to Apples, or again, something kind of more artistically broad, like a poetry competition, does have the first two criteria, if a creative game that fulfills the first two criteria also fulfills this bonus criteria, then that means that it is likely a very interesting target for computational creativity research, because we have we have this creative space that also is very easy for a computer to determine the outcome of. And so what the connection here is that if we treat gameplay as a creative domain, then that lights up evaluation as something that is very something that that's usually very difficult for computers to do in a creative domain. It gives us a foothold on how the creativity in the game can be evaluated. And yes, I'll leave this up as I take questions, but please refer to the paper for more detail.
We have time for a question.
I see, yeah. Thanks for the talk. So the interesting part about thinking about game designs here are definitely what you're mentioning is that there can be a highly complicated action space out there. I've also thought of, I've also heard of people describing things like a highly randomized, let's say, game, where even if you take a smaller, you have a smaller space of actions, you may still get a larger space of outcomes. If you think about randomness, RNG in these games, do you, especially since if you have these, then it becomes, the bonus point becomes basically nearly impossible. How do you, what do we say about RNGs? Definitely.
Where any RNG in a computer program, right, is pseudo RNG, and it's like if you just give the seed along with the player input, then it's deterministic, right? And you can value, and that's how things like tools run. So that's a good point. But yeah, I think that's accounted for.
Thank you so much. All right, and our last short talk, the last talk that's in person in this session is by Gio Leon. And it's titled Exploring Post-Phenomenological Perspectives on Creativity with GPT-4.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Giovanni Lyon. I come from the Hungary Polytechnic University and the School of Design. The contribution that I'm talking about today attempts to build a bridge between the field of computational creativity and design. There's two levels to this bridge. First is a theoretical level. I present sort of relatively famous theory in design, discussing human technology and the world and their relationships. And this more specific is under the post-phenomenological framework, and I'm talking about mediation theory, and I'm going to discuss this in a minute. But also there's another level to this bridge, which is the method I'm using to sort of play around with this theory, which is using large language models. So first, a very brief introduction. I cannot really make it justice in one slide, but fundamentally, post-phenomenology starts from Heidegger and the view that technology is not just a means to an end. It is so much more than that. It helps to define and shape the reality that we live in. And many scholars after Heidegger kind of try to reinterpret this idea. One of them is Latour, who describes society and technology as this interconnected web of networks between something that's human and something that's not human. And the stability of society kind of relies on this link. And so one of the bridges that I'm trying to build here is how do we transfer this view into a creative setting? How do we explain the relationship between humans, technology, and the world within a creative setting? So mediation theory actually comes from the North American side. Latour is French, but they kind of talk about similar things. And Latour doesn't really discuss this, but I goes and discusses different taxonomy of different relationships. We use the word embodied a lot. I've heard it a lot at this conference. Well, he describes one of this technology relationship he describes is exactly the embodied one. Like, for example, glasses. We see through the glasses. We don't look at the glasses or what the actual glasses do. Hermeneutic relationships are more related to measurements. For example, a sundial can be thought of as a hermeneutic relationship. We just look at the sundial and we kind of figure out what time it is. Another type of relationship described by Ide is the alterity relationship, which is pretty much anything that has an interface. So the example here is an ATM, which hides all the mechanisms of selecting the bank and doing the transaction. It just spits out the money, and we just have to interpret the interface. And then one last form, which is very important, is the background type of relationship, which is something that is not technology that is not perceived consciously. Like, for example, the air conditioning in this room. We don't necessarily think about it all the time, but when it goes off and it's 45 degrees outside, we might start to feel it. The neat thing about the mediation theory is that it comes with a semi-formal notation to describe a relationship between entities and how they should be interpreted with one another. And this is where sort of the interesting aspect of this theory can be molded into the computational creativity side. For example, I used here the contextualization operation to distinguish between two seemingly equal uses of a pencil. So I can have this relationship with the pencil and write a grocery list, or I can sketch, for example, a person. And these two uses actually are fundamentally different in the context in which they happen. One context is I'm going to the shopping, I'm going to the supermarket and I need to make a shopping list. Whereas one of drawing might be related more to art and artistic expression. So note that this is mostly annotation which is descriptive. And what I'm going to do right now is to show you how I prompted GPT-4 with pretty much this 2 minutes of presentation. So this table that I presented and some of these examples. And then I ask it to sort of predict, and in this case, we'll classify a certain technology that I give it as a prompt. So for example, here after the prompting of all of the above has been done, I can ask it to produce the example of a car, and the notation of a car in this case is an alterity relation. It does a good job at kind of understanding some of this basic relationship. For example, the caliper is a hermeneutic relationship. It's a different notation. And it also does a good job at sort of understanding the context if specified. So for example, I used here the example of door handle, and door handle in this case yields a door opening. But in this case, as a door handle, which is part of an installation, it kind of picks up that is a context and adopts the correct notation. So the purpose here is to then, aside from the simple examples, try to experiment when what happens if we ask the model to deal with more complex examples. And for example, this expansion here that I present, and you can find more in the paper, is quite interesting in the sense that I actually didn't expect this format out. So I asked GPT in this case, can you expand the formula of us using GPT-4 for creative writing? And so I give it sort of one format myself, and then this is what the GPT-4 spits out. It's interesting because in this particular case, I would have written this relationship as I interpret GPT-4 in the context of writing and literature. But actually GPT-4 puts the background relationship onto the I, which is essentially a reflection that we are maybe also holding some bias in when we interpret the output of GPT-4. So as conclusion to this contribution, I kind of present these two layers. One is a mediation theory, and I hope that that can fit some of the discourse in computational creativity, and the method side of things using LLMs to kind of explore this. So thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, thank you. One quick question.
Thanks for the nice talk. I'm sorry if I missed some context as I haven't read the paper yet. My question is that you're discussing GPT-4 and what GPT-4 creates in creative writing or in a writing context and understanding. However, GPT-4 is an underlying model, and there are lots of different interfaces around creative writing. So you can have like a continuous writing mode or a suggestion mode where the model is providing suggestions, or you can have it provide just a couple of sentences, all of these different things. Does the concept or the framework that you're working on apply in every modality where someone would apply it, for example, in a suggestion mode versus in a continued writing mode? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I guess the prompt that I wrote is mostly trying to describe what type of relationship is happening. So if I give it a car, and then the person driving a car is going to try to describe that interaction. So in the simple example I gave, I just ask it to describe a person using GPT-4 for creative writing, but it could be also prompted with a different technology, and therefore it would probably give a different answer. So I think what I'm trying to do here is to see whether the prompt that I wrote and sort of the conclusion that the prompt gets to are sound, and evaluate whether the examples that come out of it are meaningful or not, correct or not. And in this case, even the expectation of something to be correct gets challenged, because I personally, during this exercise of discussing the model, discussing the theory with the model, I kind of have my doubts about the theory itself. And so that helps me understand it better or to falsify it. So it's really more about the theory rather than the examples, if that makes sense.
All right, let's thank our speaker again. Now we move on to our remote talks. All right, we have a video here presented by Hugh Liu.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hugh Shucheng Liu from City University of Hong Kong School of Creative Media. Today, I'm happy to share a study with you. The title is Call for Critical and Speculative Design in Human-Computer Co-Creativity. These are the authors of this study. So first is me, I'm a postdoc, and I do research on mobile games and technology in creativity. And next, we have Yuxuan Huang. She's a PhD candidate, and she does research on generative artificial intelligence and design. And we also have Dr. Yusei Holopainen. He is an associate professor, and he does research on game design patterns and speculative design and interaction design. In today's presentation, I want to cover 5 aspects of our study. So let's start with the background. human-computer co-creativity. We try to define it as a collaboration between human and computational technology to study and enhance human creativity. And we already know it's there in non-interactive media and interactive media. And we on co-creativity are about technology and design. And design is the top representative word of topic 5, and it appeared together with 2 in topic 13 and system in topic 5. And if we look at this design process, designer and system, and the representative paper of design are like generative design and design system and design algorithm and design technique. So we may say the design topic of co-creativity itself is also technology oriented. And here I show you the 15 topics of the current human-computer co-creativity literature we find. And we have design here, as I mentioned, but design is only one part of the 15 topics. And next, we do a manual analysis of the design topic. So in 40 models, we have topics of design, right? And namely, the design is the top 3 representative words. So we find the top 20 papers of these topics, design topics, and we put them together to remove duplication. And we have 100 papers. And we all 3 authors read through these 100 papers, and we find there are 5 themes emerge from the design topics. And one of them is the number 5, speculative or critical design. We only have 3 papers. So here are the 3 papers, and we noticed, well, only 1 paper specifically focused on the speculative or critical design in computational creativity. And well, we may say speculative design and critical design is also underrepresented in the design topic. And we also do some follow-up inquiries of speculative and critical design in co-creativity. We use these 4 search strings in the database, Scopus and Web of Science, and we only get these results, 2 new results. So one is about design and speculation through our philosophical approach, and next is a poetic method inspired by speculative and critical design. And we also do some search in Google Scholar using these search strings, and we only have 5 papers related. So now we may answer the 2 research questions we proposed at the beginning. Well-defined research directions. Current research directions of human-computer co-creativity falls in the category of technology, especially about generative adversarial networks and other broader technology like machine learning or neural networks. And what's the role of design? Well, first, design is there. Design appeared in multiple topics, but compared with technology, design only takes a small part of the literature of our research on co-creativity. And the current discussion of design itself is also technology oriented, and speculative and critical design are rare in human-computer co-creativity. So we think this underrepresentativity of design in our co-creativity research may be a problem because, well, we already have design in practice, but design in research is scarce. And why is a problem? Because it's a missing of middle ground. Well, on the one hand, we have discussion on the impact of co-creativity, like the utopia or dystopia, but that's too general and abstract. And we also have concrete and technology-oriented research on co-creativity, but like they propose optimized algorithm or new solutions, technology solutions, but they are not necessarily talk about the impact of co-creativity. So we think if we try to understand the bigger impact of co-creativity system, we need a middle ground here to make some concrete examples of design in different settings to raise the awareness and the dialogue of co-creativity and their impacts. Therefore, we call for this research through critical and speculative design. So research through design is an approach where we make design artifacts to use it to for research, to answer research questions, and we can explore possible effects or impacts of co-creativity in a more concrete way. And critical design is using design to challenge our assumptions of how co-creativity objects can fit into our human world. And speculative design is using design to think about different futures. We don't just look at what's possible right now in a technology or cultural way, but we think about different futures maybe created by co-creativity designs and settings. And for the future work, we want to make some code speculation workshops because it's one of the collaborative methods with speculative design practice, and we discuss design fictions about human-computer co-creativity. One of our work in progress is like how generative AI would change the co-creation in the next 10 to 15 years, like how filmmakers or directors would use generative AI to design stories. So in conclusion, in this study, we use bibliometric analysis and the LDA topic modeling on the 916 research articles on human-computer co-creativity we already have. And we find this field is currently dominated by technology-oriented research. And well, although we have design in these topics in this literature, but design itself is also technology-oriented. And we lack critical speculations on the impact of co-creativity systems, human-computer co-creativity. Therefore, we call for more critical and speculative design research on human-computer co-creativity to boost the reflection on the impact of co-creativity. Yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you.
All right, we have time for a question.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if you considered using any more modern topic modeling techniques like per topic or top-to-fac.
Yeah. Yes, I heard the question. So more methods of topic modeling. Yes. So when we write this paper, do this research, we simply use the LDA. But after that, we also tried several methods, and we're also in different softwares. Yeah, and we have some similar findings. So yeah, but that's not written in the current version of paper.
All right, thank you very much. Let's thank our speaker again.
Thank you.
And next we have two talks left in the session. They're both short talks. So one of them is by Michael Mueller, who is going next, and it's titled Interactional Co-Creativity of Human and AI in Analogy-Based Design.
Thank you for coming to our talk. We are IBM researchers from North and South America. 11 years ago, Mary Lou Meyer asked an insightful question: who's being creative? Among the responses to her question were a paper by Anna Catasalo and Tapia Takala, who proposed their 5 C's model of co-creativity. A collective, a person, and an AI collaborate to make a contribution for a community in a context. We examine their proposition through a creative strategy called framing, which we interpret as constructing an integrated set of UI features guided by a framing metaphor. We conducted our informal experiments using the GPT 3.5 Turbo large language model with a highly conversational user interface from Steve Ross's work, which he tuned for short conversational turns and a humble, supportive protocol. I'll spend most of the presentation on this slide. Here we show the first and third experiments from our paper. In each case, we wanted to create a set of user interface concepts that would be easy for a non-specialist to understand, similar to the 1980s work on the desktop UI. On your left, in the first experiment, the frame was a series of analogies based on the concept, if a database is like a toolbox. Then we explore how tools in the toolbox could be mapped to computer concepts. On your right, in the third experiment, the frame was a human interacting with a computer is like a conductor leading an orchestra. Similarly, we explore how aspects of the conductor and orchestra can be mapped to computer concepts. In the first experiment on your left, the user chose the framing concept. By contrast, in the third experiment on your right, we asked the UI to choose the framing concept. And here we emphasize that either party can propose a framing concept, but only the human can make the choice about whether to use that concept. On the left, the mapping of a computer concept to a toolbox was a series of simple comparisons. On the right, the mapping explicitly lists each domain and makes a specific linkage of concepts from one domain to the other. Finally, we note that in the third experiment on your right, the UI was capable of representing two distinct perspectives, that of the conductor and that of the orchestra. This is similar to a theory of mind task in which an agent, in this case the UI, can represent the knowledge or intentions of two or more parties who have different knowledges or different intentions. In conclusion, we return to Meyer's question from our first slide, who's being creative? In our experiments, we showed that several kinds of structured co-creativity may occur between person and AI. In the 5C language of Cantasalo and Takala, the person and the AI form a collective in which they collaborate to make a contribution. However, we have not yet answered the question, where is the locus of the co-creativity? We propose to focus our attention on the hybrid interactional space that the person and the AI form in the conversational UI. Thereby, we have demonstrated forms of co-creativity that exemplify Cantasalo's and Takala's 5Cs model and that converge with Meyer to say, person and AI co-create in their shared interactional space. In the future, we hope to explore additional co-creativity strategies. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Do we have a question?
I don't know if he's there.
I'm here.
Hello, hi, yes. Thanks for the talk. It was very cool. I was wondering what drew you to analogies specifically.
It's a good question, and the answer is we thought we'd start there. So I don't have a good answer to your good question.
Okay, cool.
Well, metaphor-based design has been a big thing in human-computer interaction. So analogies are a superset of metaphors and similes. So I guess I would say it was based on that heritage, but I don't have a principled reason.
Thank you.
We could make time for another quick question, if there's anything. All right, let's thank Michael again. And now we are on the final paper in this session. It's a really sort of fantastic ending to this session on co-creativity. It's called On the Notion of Creative Personhood, and I think you'll find it quite interesting, and it's presented by Alison Pease.
Hello, I'm Alison Pease. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Dundee in Scotland, and I'm presenting joint work with Simon Colton and Berka Banar from Queen Mary University of London on the notion of creative personhood. Thanks for having us. We developed the notion of creative personhood as a response to the recent spectacular successes of generative AI. The outstanding quality of outputs from image, text, music, and other generative deep learning systems means that there's no longer a question as to whether AI systems can automatically generate digital artifacts of human-level quality. However, the influx of unlimited artifacts has had disruptive effects on artistic communities, who are now facing issues such as copyright theft, potential loss of earnings, degradation of an artist's legacy, and demeaning of their skill sets. One way of solving this would be to develop ethical guidelines for their use in this context and restrict the uses of generative AI systems. We suggest here an alternative in which AI systems are engineered to be more like creative people within a community. The addition of creative people per se to artistic communities is a welcome rather than disruptive thing, as it keeps a field alive and current. We believe that AI artists, poets, and musicians can also be a net benefit to society if we're clear about how they'll fit into human communities. We started this work by asking, what is it like to be in the presence of a creative person? There's actually surprisingly little research on this. From our own experience, we have found it can be exhilarating, has the potential to learn, be inspired, have our minds changed and our assumptions challenged is ever present. There's no reason to believe that generative AI systems couldn't also be exhilarating in similar or new ways. However, to the best of our knowledge, this is not a focal point for any substantial research program. We continued our thought process with the following questions. What, if anything, is special to the acceptance of people or machines into communities of creatives? And considered aspects such as individuality, agency, and responsibilities, elements of what we call creative personhood. We then considered what notions of personhood could potentially be projected onto an AI system, and asked, how does the current ethos and practice of generative deep learning affect the potential for AI systems to be accepted as creative individuals with elements of personhood? We argue that engineering elements of creative personhood in generative AI systems could help to steer development in a more useful and sensitive direction than having super intelligent, hyper-productive generative AI tools for public use. We build on previous work in the philosophy of computational creativity. Along with colleagues, Simon and I have considered aspects of the creative act in humans, such as framing, authenticity, our face model, and so on, and suggested computational readings of these. We extend this approach to looking at aspects of the human creator and their relationship to a community of co-creatives in developing the idea of creative personhood and making initial suggestions as to how we could interpret this computationally. The question of whether AI systems can have personhood has been the subject of recurring philosophical and legal debate, often framed in terms of necessary and sufficient conditions such as intentionality, conscious experience, and free will. Crucially, being human is not considered a necessary condition for personhood, with non-human examples in various legal systems including business corporations, ships, temples, dead people, spirits, and idols. Instead, it's a property ascribed by societies and legal systems onto something to imply responsibility and agency. This is important. Personhood is a secondary concept projected onto various entities, so it will be a societal choice as to whether we frame AI systems as having creative personhood. In our paper, we focus on 4 elements of creative personhood. Firstly, we look at creative communities and consider what aspects of creative personhood tend to feature in creative partnerships. Next, we look at individuality and the notion of presence to describe the impact a creative AI system has on its environment and vice versa. Thirdly, we consider agency and autonomy and the idea that an AI system might set its own agenda. And finally, we build on our previous work on the machine condition to consider self-expression and responsible behaviours. We end by looking at ChatGPT in this context and observe that sometimes it felt genuine to project notions of creative personhood onto it, while other aspects felt either more difficult in the present or as a potential in the future. We hope that considering aspects of creativity other than generation will suggest new directions for CC and generative AI. This will also give us focus as a community and help to keep us relevant. This is very preliminary work and we plan to extend this, so we'd really appreciate thoughts and critical feedback on our ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Hi, Michael.
Hello, Alison. What a lovely talk. Thank you.
Thanks.
My question is, do we need to think about this as a binary? Either it's human or it's not human, but there's a lot of things that are not human or not quite human. I'm thinking in Australia, country itself is an entity which has cognitions, intentions, beliefs. It makes contributions. Country in collaboration with humans writes papers in the field of geography. Maybe there's intermediary kinds of intelligences between not human and human. Just a thought.
Yeah, so I'm not sure about human and not human. To me, that distinction does seem quite binary. I'm not familiar with the thing that you just mentioned in Australia, but certainly personhood is not a binary concept. So that's maybe an easier word to use than human. As I said in the talk, other things, non-human things have been attributed personhood in the past. And when we looked at ChatGPT, we felt that aspects of personhood could be attributed to it now. Obviously, it's not been written with that in mind, but even so, you could kind of imagine it. And obviously other systems, not just ChatGPT, while other aspects of personhood might be harder to project onto it. But in the end, it's a societal choice as to whether we find it useful to attribute personhood to a thing that's not a person. But yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely not binary. Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thanks very much. It's a fantastic talk to finish our session. Let's thank all of our speakers one more time. Right, and now we have a brief, about a 15-minute break before the industry panel. Thanks. Oh, sorry, no, Dan, correct this.
It's all good. We have one short break. We will start back here at 3:30 with more talks. So have a quick snack and a quick cup of coffee and be back here in about 17 minutes. All right, we're going to get started with the last technical session of the day now. So please grab a seat. Welcome to session 3. I think we're in good shape, and I will hide this. I'm not hiding Raphael. It's my pleasure to introduce Janet Raffner, who's going to be the session chair for session 3. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks everyone. Thanks for listening and being here for the last series of talks for today. We have a nice, exciting lineup, a couple of longer talks and a lot of lightning talks. Our first talk today is by Raphael Ruiz, and he will be presenting a computational model to evaluate coherence of characters' behavior based on their emotional relationship.
Thank you. Hello. Well, as you know, I have been working for many years in the system Mexica to build Mexica. I studied a lot of people that have really good ideas about how the creative process works. I took all those ideas, I built a model, a computer model, and Mexica is the instantiation of this model. So the idea is to reflect the way we think. One of the features of Mexica is that the system represents knowledge in terms of emotional links and conflicts between characters. The system doesn't use words, anything like that. And one of the nice things of having a system like this is that you can do a lot of tests and you can clearly map the output with all the processes that are going inside. So you can see exactly why the system selected this action or that action and find an explanation about that. And I really like that. I think it's very, very important. Mexica, well, generates a lot of stories. Most of them are not good. Some of them are good. And so that's the reason the system published its own book some years ago. But as I said, most of the stories are not good. And here I have an example of one of them. So the princess hated the knight and then hurt him. The princess cures the knight's wounds. The knight was grateful towards the princess and the knight fell in love, and so on. So as you can see, this story is it's not really good, no? There is a problem because if we take into consideration common sense knowledge, it seems to be a contradiction between the behavior of the princess and the emotions that she feels towards the knight. So I refer to this situation as emotional incoherent. So the model originally didn't consider this kind of problems. So when I started to generate this kind of stories, when the system started to generate this kind of stories, I realized that it was important also to consider this emotional coherence. So what I report in this work is the solution I designed to extend these original ideas that I used to build Mexica. So in order that my system have the ability to evaluate this coherence of emotional behavior between characters. So let me introduce a couple. Oops, I don't know what I did. Oh. Okay, so I will explain to you a little bit of what I mean with this. So what is an emotional trace? This is an important concept for the things I'm going to present. Each time an action is performed by some of the characters, new emotional relations and conflicts start to be established between them. As I mentioned before, this is a very important part of the system. It's how the system knows how to develop new stories. So this interaction between characters is what I refer to as the emotional trace. So let me give you an example. Imagine Carmen, Julia, and Maria. Those are characters from a story. So if Carmen is fond of Julia, that's an emotional link with a positive balance. Then one expects that in the following events, all the positive relations between them will continue, will be stronger. So for example, Carmen will helps Julia to solve a problem. So I refer to this situation as a positive emotional trace between these two characters. Of course, it's the same for the opposite. If Carmen strongly dislikes Maria, an emotional link with a negative balance, one expects that in the following events, this negative relation will grow. So, for example, Carmen and Maria will end being enemies. So this is a negative emotional trace between Carmen and Maria. So, given a partial story where two characters have developed a positive emotional trace, the coherence of the narrative is disrupted when an action with negative consequence between the two characters are added in the tale. No? For example, if Carmen and Maria are best friends, it doesn't make sense that out of the blue, Carmen betrays Maria. And of course, the opposite, a partial story where two characters develop a negative emotional trace, the coherence of the narrative is disrupted when an action with positive consequence between these two characters are added. So if Carmen and Maria are enemies, it doesn't make sense that Carmen asks Maria to be the godmother of her son. So those are simple rules. Of course, you will tell me, Rafael, the stories are full of descriptions with one character betrays the other and so on and so on. So to keep the coherence of the tales in this case, this change of emotional relations between the characters must be justified. So I refer to this type of actions as transitional actions. So those actions allow us to make the transition between a positive or negative phrase. So the model I want to present here. So I will have to use or present the very basic aspect of the model because I really try to reduce my presentation and I'm checking here my time and I know I have just some minutes left, so I will not have time to present just the basic things. Please read the paper because there are some interesting things there. So I will do my best. I will go a little bit faster now to try to explain to you what I did. So imagine we have a story in progress, we have an emotional trace, and we have an action with two characters, character A and character B. So what I will do now is formalize the things I just mentioned to you. So I developed 3 rules. The rule 1 says that given an emotional trace, an action to be used to continue this story, when the consequences of the actions are negative, then the emotional trace cannot include positive emotional relations from the character A towards the character B. In the model, I have to distinguish which is the proactive character. I don't have time to explain it, but that's the reason it's mentioned here. So if this rule is not fulfilled, the story is classified as emotional incoherent. So it's just what I told you earlier. And the second rule is the same. When the emotional trace and an action to be used continuing the story, when we have that, the consequence of the action, if the consequences are positive, then the emotional trace cannot include negative emotional relations from character E towards character B, otherwise it's not coherent. And finally, I have the third rule is given an emotional trace that include both a positive and a negative relation between characters, I call this situation clashing emotion. No, it's typical in soap operas, for example, that you love and hate someone. So the consequence of the action can be either positive or negative, but once a decision is made, that cannot be changed. So with these rules and other things that are not mentioned, I started to make some tests and I want to share with you what this test were. So we started with this sequence of actions that introduces a king, a prince, and a knight. The king was a proud father of the princess. For many years, the king and the knight had hated each other. However, the knight and the young princess fall in love, and so on. So as you can see in this small fraction of the tale, there is a strong positive emotional relation between the king and the daughter. There is a hated relationship between the king and the knight, and a positive love relation between the princess and the knight. So what we do next is that we ask the system to evaluate these three scenes that start with this I just showed you, but we have different endings for them. So the idea is to see if those partial stories were coherent or not. So this is the first of the scene. As I mentioned, the king was proud of the father, of the princess. Sorry, I mean, for many years, the king and the knight hated each other. However, the knight and the young princess fell in love. Then the king killed the princess. Then he killed the jaguar knight. That's how it ends. Mexique is a little bit bloody, but you know. So the system produces a report. This is just part of the report, and it says that there is an illogical action there. No, action 7, when the king killed the princess. No, and basically what it says is that they have earlier a positive relationship, so the murder of the princess doesn't make sense. So that's rule number 1. Yeah. So the system reports that it's not happy with this ending. So this is the second scene. We have the same beginning. So after the princess and the knight fell in love, the knight felt betrayed by the king felt betrayed by his daughter, so he killed the knight. The princess wounded the king. Later, the princess cured the king. Notice that there is here a transitional action, no, to make sense of the story. So this is the report that the system generates, and it finds one illogical action. It says that the consequences of the prince curing the king are not in concordance with emotional trends from the princess towards the king, because early the princess had established a negative relation with the king. Just to elaborate this a little bit, at the beginning, remember, the princess and the king have a very, very positive relationship, but then the king killed the knight, so of course the princess got really, really angry with the king, so she has a clash in emotions there. So the princess decides to wound her father. So that's okay until that point. So she had positive and negative relations. She decides to go for the negative relations and wound the father. So based on the model, she needs to be congruent with the behavior, but she is not, because later she cures the father. So that's the reason the system reports that this story is not very coherent. And finally, the last scene, the same beginning, and it ends. The king felt betrayed by his daughter, so he attacked the knight. The knight wounded the king. The princess killed the knight, and then she cured the king. So the princess again has clashing emotions, both with the king, which is her father, and both with the knight. But this time, the princess reacts negatively towards the knight and continues with that, and positively towards her father. So for the system, these actions make sense. They follow rule number 3. So then we wanted to know what people think about all these evaluations that the system did. And we asked 39 subjects just to have an idea of if we're going in the right direction or not. So they were asking 2 questions for each of the scenes. The idea was to evaluate the ending, the closing of each of the scenes to make it, to see if they make sense for these subjects. They have to evaluate also the ending within 1 and 5. And very important, we ask to each participant to explain why they gave that evaluation. So what we were really interested to understand this part, to see if that makes sense with our model. That's what we wanted. So this is the first scene again. That's the question we asked the people. Does it seem coherent to you that the king and kills the princess. So almost 67% of the subjects answered with no or two. That is most of them thought it didn't make sense. So this is some of the comments they made. I would think I will go quickly with this slide because my time is going. So basically, the comments suggest that the rule number one is the one that the system used makes sense for the people. So just to remember, the rule says if the king has a positive emotional relation towards the princess, and then he performs an action with negative consequence for her, in this case, killing her, such an action is classified as incoherent. So it works. The second question, does it seem coherent to you that the king then kills the knight? So almost 50% answer that yes, it makes sense, no, that that happen. These are some of the comments that the people gave to us. So as you can see, this comment seems to be consistent again with rule number one. I will go to the next because time. So this is the second scene. The question is, does it seem coherent to you that the king kills the knight? Almost 60% of the people thought that it makes sense, that this kind of behavior. So here are some of the comments that the people told us. And so again, it makes sense with rule number one. So I got to scene two because I feel that the time is going. So does it seem coherent to you that the princess first wounds the king and then kills the king? So most people were not really convinced about this. They were not sure what to think about that. So here you can see in their answers that they didn't know what to, that both situations could happen. So if you remember, this situation is when the princess has a clash in emotion, and it seems that this clash in emotion is making a little bit confused the whole situation for the people who answer. So one of the consequences that we need to take in consideration things like the princess can't regret her actions. That's not considered in the model, in the original model, and that's one of the things that the subjects suggested. I will skip this because it's more or less clear, but again, in this last one, does it seem coherent to you that the princess then kills the knight and cures the king? Again, 40%, 38%, 50% almost, said that it doesn't make sense, but the system thought it makes sense. So the problem seems to be not that the princess was aggressive toward the knight. The problem is that she killed him, and the people thought that it was too much. And we didn't consider that also in the model. So to finish, these results suggest that Mexica is useful to modify and to expand the original theory. And really my main message here is that when we have a computer model with this kind of approach, we can put there all our ideas. It doesn't matter if they are very crazy or not, and we can map these ideas with every single step that is happening. And then we can, like in this case, improve the system, see how the things are run, and go into the system because we have a clear understanding how things work, and improve the way the system works. And in that way, we can hopefully contribute to understand better how the creative process is. Very important not to forget that. So this kind of approaches is still very, very important for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With my also not so subtle standing up to move to questions. We have time for one quick question. So are there any questions? Yeah, I saw a hand right up there. Blue shirt. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Raphael. You certainly don't get stories like that from ChatGPT. I'll grant you that. You present a transactional review of emotion here, which seems to me to be somewhat short term. you could describe it as, what have you done for me lately? Or the last thing that someone has done defines, it seems, the relationship between two people. When in fact you have relationships like between the father and the daughter that are lifelong. And you have short-term events that create new emotions, but don't last as long as the bonds that exist or pre-exist that. So you have multiple parallel connections between characters that you have to account for, and you have to account for the depth of those relationships and the duration of those relationships in time. How do you plan to do that?
Well, as I said, first of all, this is an emotional trait. So it's not just what just happened. The idea is that you have a record of what all the different situations, emotional terms that are happening in the story. Yes. And if you remember, one of the rules, which is not working very well after this test, what it does is try to keep the coherence. If you decide, when you have multiple emotions towards someone, you decide one path and you have to follow that path, yes? And there are transitional actions that allow you to change. So yes, you can have the whole thing is already represented, no? Not for a very, very long stories, but the kind of stories that Mexica generates. And they are there. And the idea with this kind of model is that there is a logical, a logical way to keep the coherence, knowing that there are different kind of situations, no? Like the clashing emotions I just described.
Great. Let's give Raphael another big applause. And we move on to our next speaker. Dan Brown will be presenting a work entitled Reviewing Creativity and Algorithmic Information Theory.
I know you've never seen me before. So it will probably not surprise, this may not be the most coherent talk I've ever given. Please be generous. I want to start off with a quick announcement though. It's Joao's birthday. He told me earlier today that this happens about half of ICCCs, and this is one of them. So happy birthday, Joao. All right, so this is the latest in what might turn out to be a long sequence of papers. A paper that we published in 2021 honestly kind of changed my research life, because we started thinking about creativity and concepts of creativity under the lens of Kolmogorov complexity and algorithmic information theory. And that turns out to be really productive and interesting. And so I want to mention the paper that we published in 2021, Tiasa Mondol, my former master's student, who is still a PhD student here at Waterloo, though holy cow, she's studying quantum computing now, and I did back then. The ideas underlying this have the annoying property that they tend to be uncomputable, but they still make us think a lot about what the core concepts we're using when we talk about novelty, value, typicality, atypicality, and a bunch of other desiderata in creativity are. The basic idea that's in that paper, which is not present in other papers in this domain, is that we go into the idea that a concept or an object is of high value if it has a short program, but if all of the short programs take a long time to build it. And that pair of things together is the crux. And also we talk about in that work that that an object is novel based on a class of related objects, and that novelty has to do with the idea that it's clearly part of the class, but also knowing the members of that class doesn't give you as much information as you expected towards the new object. We'll talk a little bit about that in this talk, but less than you might think. So two fundamental concepts. The first is Kolmogorov complexity and conditional Kolmogorov complexity. K of x, the Kolmogorov complexity of an object x, is the length of the shortest program whose output is that object x. And we say that if an object has Kolmogorov complexity roughly equal to its length, that it's random. That's actually the best definition that computer science has for the concept of an object being a random object. On the other hand, if K of x is small, then there's some structure built into that object. You could compress it into a very small space,
And then there's a program that you could run that would reproduce that whole object starting from the small compression. Then the conditional Kolmogorov complexity of an object is, if I already know the object Y, how much information does that give me towards X? In other words, if I start off with a program that already contains Y as its input, how much does that shrink what it takes to write down X? And you should think about that as being sort of how much knowing Y tells me about X. Then the other concept, and now we're already into kind of a little bit of the weeds, is logical depth. An object is logically deep if it has short programs, but they all run for a really long time. And in particular, the logical depth of a program or of an object is the shortest runtime among all of the programs that are close in length to the shortest program for that object X, with a little bit of a fudge factor thrown in. Now, if the logical depth of an object is high, again, that means it has short programs that run in a really long time. And so that means somebody did a lot in making that object, and you could reconstruct it, but it would take a lot of work. You could think about theorems as being an example of something that's logically deep. The description of the axioms might be simple, but the proof might be real long for something that you're interested in. And so we make the claim that logical depth and value have a lot to do with each other because it has something to do with required effort and non-randomness. So this is a paper not about K complexity and not about novelty and value. This is a paper about review. And in particular, we want to talk about what the role of a review is and how to think about them as Kolmogorov complexity style objects or algorithmic information theory objects. So what do we do when we read a review? Why do we read reviews? Well, we want to know whether something is good or bad. We want a summary of the object itself. And then we probably want some sense of like, what is this object and why do I care about it in the first place? Not just it's good, it's bad, or here's the summary, but here's the sphere in which that object lives. And every single one of those is a creative task. Summarization can be a creative task. Evaluation can be a creative task, and certainly contextualization. And so so that starts to make you think a little bit about AIT if you're my co-author, who, because I'm completely spacey, I didn't even say, which is Max Papercorn, who's sitting in the back. Sorry about that, Max. So that's when Max and I started to talk about, like, all right, what more is there that makes this frame of thinking about K complexity relevant? And it's because also when I tell you to write a review, I tell you how long you have, and I tell you how much space you have. So you can't just write down the whole object and say, my review of War and Peace is a 1,000-page novel called War and Peace. You have to shrink it. And also, you're on deadline, my friend. That review that you promised me, you haven't gotten it to me yet. Where's your review? You have 3 hours, 2 days, something like that. And so, in fact, we're kind of doing something like lossy compression, speedy lossy compression. And that makes me start to think about how much runtime does it take and how much space does it take to describe an object. And also, there's a communications thing going on here. Reviews communicate information from a creator, which we'll call A, via a reviewer, who we'll call B, to a consumer, a reader, we'll call C. And the artifacts in question are the S, which is the created object, and also the review R, which is the information that gets sent by the reviewer to the reader C. And so you kind of start this process. I open up my newspaper and there's a review of a new novel. I kind of know what I'm expecting to see. So I have some prior information, some prior expectation. How much does my understanding of what a book is or what a creative object is change as a result of seeing that review? And so one way of thinking about that is to think about the Kolmogorov complexity conditioned on the conditioned on the reader themselves, how much they would have needed to know in order to make the object before they saw the review versus after when they see the review. And that's how much they learned. So that's one way in which reviews fit this frame. Another reason why it fits this frame is because we might think about
learning about a domain itself. So for example, a perfectly legitimate review of this Jackson Pollock painting might be, it's a typical Jackson Pollock painting, but the paint splatters are in this particular pattern. So that gives us a sense of typicality or atypicality. How much more information do I need to have in my review to explain the object I'm specifically interested in, on top of what I already know about the domain itself? Again, they've got to be really fast and they've got to be really short. And that raises some sort of interesting questions. What does it mean to do a review and be trustworthy? Like, I could tell you this paper that I'm going to give you literally a 10 or 15-minute summary of, it's a really great paper, but you kind of have to take my word for it. Why should you believe me? And so we need to think a little bit in this process, and it's explained in the paper in some detail, about what happens when reviewers lie, what happens when reviewers don't know what they're talking about, and what happens when creators try to confuse reviewers. And that's all detailed in the paper in some sense. On the other hand, one place where you can start to actually, if you shrink the task of the reviewer or allow the reviewer to focus themselves, then you can actually make some progress in this direction. So for example, this happens to be slide 10, not slide 9, but you could give a really long explanation of why this is a great slide. And people might be in a position to say, okay, I don't have time to do that same level of detail on the whole talk, but I'll trust you that the whole talk is good because you said that slide was good. I do this sometimes when I write reviews of romance novels. I will just focus on one interaction and say, this is trash because blank, or this was very good because, unlike usually, again, that's typicality and that's a frame of reference, I know something about the domain and I will display that to you. Another thing that's in the paper in a fair amount of detail is thinking about who is a reviewer and who is a reader, and realizing that actually there's a dance going on here. There are knowledgeable and unknowledgeable reviewers and knowledgeable and unknowledgeable consumers. And if you send a good review by a naive reviewer to an expert, they will look at you and be like, yeah, I knew all of that before I read this review. What did I just learn? And vice versa, if you send one of our scholarly reviews of an ICCC submission to somebody who doesn't know anything about computational creativity, they'll just be snowed. And so the paper goes into some detail about how information gets conveyed between creator, reviewer, and reader, depending on what is actually already within the knowledge of those three actors. Then we need to also talk about creativity and review as an actually creative task. So in particular, there is aesthetic value to reviews. I mean, we have people who are called film critics, and some of them are good at it and some of them are bad at it. And in fact, people write whole essays of criticism. There's clearly a reason for that. And so we can talk about novelty and value and other aspects of creativity in the context of a review itself. And in particular, we can even move one step back and think about not the review, but imagine the reviewer as an agent, as a computational program, and think about that program as also potentially being a creative member of the ensemble. And this is interesting because AIT tends to, algorithmic information theory, tends to be a narrative about products. And this is, we're starting to thinking a little bit about the agents themselves as computational actors. I want to give some examples as I'm running low on time, I know. Here's the obvious one in some sense. It's the second time in this conference we're seeing this same ready-made. But the point of the exercise is that, so you could just give a very straightforward review of this object that says it's a urinal. But then that's potentially very surprising, doesn't give you any context, and doesn't change your model of what conceptual art is. In the paper, I make reference to a piece called Piss Christ by André Serrano, which doesn't make as much sense if you don't know about this piece. Another example that's in the same vein is the classic piece 433. A trivial review of 433 is it's 273 seconds of silence. That is true. But if you start learning about the movement about environmental sound, if you learn about the tradition from which John Cage was writing, and you also learn about how this piece has been performed in various different contexts, a review of this sort is not sufficient.
And in particular, you can imagine how much somebody's understanding of how surprising this piece is might change depending on what kind of review they see. In particular, an in-depth review of 433 might tell me something about where was it being performed, what were the specific contexts, other pieces that were in the concert, and why does this fit into an ensemble or of a whole, and might give you a better sense of what would be a normal performance of the piece, what would be an unusual performance, and so on. And then one last example of this is, I really loved this. I went to see the Hilliard Ensemble in Toronto a bunch of years ago. They're a Renaissance ensemble from England, and they started describing one chunk of their concert as being 4 words: late Tallis, early bird. And that only makes sense if you know 3 things. 1, they're English. 2, Tallis and Bird are both Renaissance English composers. And 3, they don't care about the fact that the piece that they were about to do was French. And if you have all of that information, then the fact that you're about to listen to a piece of Renaissance French music makes perfect sense, and it fit perfectly. But just those 4 words is actually a lot to expect of somebody. This model gives a sense of why those 4 words work together. Limitations. Obviously, I can't go into all of them in this time. One is obviously the one that I mentioned before, that everything having to do with Komogoro complexity is uncomputable. We'll bracket that for now, because it's just not a problem. More seriously, both sides of reviewing things is hard. It's hard to review good things because, as I said, if something is good, that means it's got a lot of computation engine stuck into it, and detecting that is really, really hard. And bad objects, it's really easy to confuse people into thinking that they're good. And even if you say something is random garbage, you need to justify that fact. I'm not going to talk about extensions, except I will mention another reason why this is hard is because every single one of you is experiencing my talk differently, not just because you have different background, but also because you are in different bodies. And so that whole experience is fundamentally different, and that matters a lot too. So reviewing is a creative task and a computational task. And the whole frame that we're working in here is one that Max Papercorn came up with the idea of calling quantification, or giving a computational understanding of the press to. And I think that's a frame that's useful in this time frame. I want to acknowledge NSERC funds my work. Max is funded by a bunch of people. And then I specifically want to acknowledge Tiasa, and also there's a reviewer who we know who it is, and he's not here, but he provided a lot of help along the way. And these are the layouts of these slides came from the creative thing within PowerPoint that lays out your slides for you. And that's my dog. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the great presentation. We have time for one question. Yes, here.
Yeah, thank you very much. This presentation was really, really interesting. And yeah, about this, so I have 2 questions, so maybe I need to decide one of them. Okay.
In my other job, I'm wanting this to be right on time.
Let's go. Well, one of them I asked Max already, so I can ask you later. So let's go with this idea of what you know about the person or the producer, the process, and everything will change your opinion on that. I've been thinking a lot about that. And there's one specific thing I like to think about is, for example, for generative art, do you think explainable, the ability of explain the process would change the idea of the people and like receiving the piece of art, or at least knowing what is in the model, what the model knows in a sense? Yeah, I think a lot about that, and I would like to hear your comments.
Yeah, I think a lot about this too. I mean, remember that we've been doing this forever, right? We talk about culture, and when I talk about being an American guy who lives in Canada, you already come up with some sort of preconceived concept of who I am that's based on just those very few words of identity that I just used. And so in some sense, we are built in to sort of assume that history makes forward.
or your background makes the land that you makes the person that you are in or that you are embodying. I don't know that. My honest belief is I don't think that human beings are going to find computational examples or computational explanations very satisfying. Explainable AI hasn't been very successful at that kind of thing. And I expect that in the age of neural networks being the primary tools, I think that's going to get worse. But it's a good question. Thank you.
Wonderful. Let's give Dan another big hand of applause. So next up, we have a familiar name, also a co-author from the last paper. We have Max Peperkorn. Hopefully I pronounced that okay. Yes. Up presenting a paper entitled On Characterizations of Large Language Models and Creativity Evaluation. And this is a speedy talk. So you have 5 minutes. And I stand up when you have 30 seconds left.
Perfect. Right. Thank you. So this is a paper that really emerged from the things we heard about how people describe the behaviors and of large language models. And it also came up in our research group. So, so this paper is in collaboration with Dan and my supervisor, Anna, and we were feeling a bit uncomfortable with the words being used for all the behaviors and processes that were going on. So in short, we hear all these things about that that LLMs are reasoning or sentient or knowing in the same way as humans are. And we would like to present a discourse that's summarized in sentence, probabilities are not knowledge and distributions are not minds. After that, we were wondering about how these, about the creativity of these things. And we have a brief evaluation using the mirror generation and the creative tripod frames. And the way people talk about these things and the things they can do may lead to new features and behaviors that we may not be able to assess properly using the frameworks we have right now. So I just want to briefly mention this sci-fi magazine, which is one of the few where an unknown sci-fi fantasy author can submit their short stories. And of course, after ChatGPT was released, they got a massive influx of stories. And this sort of highlights some of the issues I feel that are coming, maybe not now because the stories are not very good yet, but there are some questions about skill and the value of a story. Yeah, so LLMs are in essence just very high order Markov chains, and we believe that they are at best simulating tasks that the human minds engage in, and we believe that, well, the traditional concerns still apply. So we have 2 examples to support our discourse, and the first is imagine the large language model as your therapist. And when you ask the question, like you say, I'm happy, what can I do to become happy again? And the generic answer is that it will answer with a generic thing that makes people happy. We can add a bit of personal information to give an answer about what makes people like you happy, but to make you specifically happy, we're missing this idea of metacognition and theory of mind, because when we speak with someone, we sort of imagine their position and use the information that we know about them, which we find lacking in large language models for obvious reasons. The second thing that we encounter a lot is that LLMs are now being used as evaluators themselves. So, for example, classify a joke as funny or not funny, and you might answer, it will answer funny or not funny, but does it really work? The probabilities may say it's almost 50-50. Would that be meaningful? And in fact, large language models learn relations between words and not between words and their meaning, like we do. They're still good for some things. We all know them, style transfer. They can conjure up massive amounts of information that we could only dream of. They can do combinational and exploratory creativity for these examples. I'll go a bit fast. So
this let us wonder about the creativity of these things. Because of all these descriptions, we were wondering if the behaviors of the exhibit are still, if our frameworks are still up to evaluating these things. And we limit our scope to just the merit generation and creative tripod framework, but we intend to do further evaluations on creative communication and certain domain-specific tasks. Right. All right. So I'll just go over all the characteristics, all the criteria of each of the frameworks. So they can do novelty. There's just a lot of information in there. Varies with each prompt, but yeah, in general, we would say that there can be some new things. They are by design typical. Value quality, I think we already heard this, but grammatically quality is very high, but factuality, hallucinations lead to poor results. And I wonder if everyone can write a novel, what does value even mean? Right, so intentionality this is kind of an interesting one. So LLMs have these human feedback mechanisms to keep them in check, and they can explain themselves very well, fix errors, but whose intentionality is really represented? The intentionality might be my owner who would like to get rich, which is totally sensible. If the model is not safe, nobody can use it. So that's a thing we find difficult to pin down. I'll speed up. Importantly, skill is not just writing a good text, but also separating fact from fiction. They're not designed to do something different. So imagination, there may be some appearance of this, but they are not really imagining new things. They can reflect. So there's some appreciation going on, but we just feel like they are kind of beyond merit generation, and they can be perceived as creativity, but there is some friction here and there that's problematic. And yeah, that's it. This is the summary again. This is it.
We have time for one quick question. Anyone? Blue shirt.
Thank you, Max. I'm really surprised by the statement probabilities are not knowledge.
Yeah.
It would seem to me that knowledge of probabilities is de facto knowledge, and that knowing the probability of something is a very, very knowledgeable thing to have. So what do you mean? It seems a little dismissive.
Well, I guess it really comes from this, when we apply these things as an evaluator and we say, well, this specific prompt and with a joke in it, it has a 50 or some probability of being funny. It's hard to see whether it really thinks that, or if it's so the fact that it has this probability of being funny doesn't mean that it really thinks that, or it just, I find it hard to find the cost between the prompt and the probability of the next token and the actual, well, it's not, there's a bit of trust, that's the thing I'd say.
Okay, but I think that applies to humans too.
Yeah.
Great. Let's get one more big hand of applause. And we have our next speaker who will be giving two speed talks. No, one speed talk, one longer talk. It is I'm sorry for the pronunciation. Ika Wahio, perhaps.
Ika here.
Thank you. Sorry, and the talk is, the first talk is the spectrum of unpredictability and its relationship to creative autonomy.
Yes, thank you. So this talk is about unpredictability. And if you think about black box systems, then you came up with these three qualities of theirs: unpredictability, unexplainability, and uncontrollability. So this talk is about unpredictability. This word is often used with generative AI. It is considered important. It makes the price possible. Of course, if you already know what the system will do, then it isn't really creative or perceived as creativity. It leaves room for autonomy, since unpredictability makes it also uncontrollable, harder to insist control on. So maybe it can do things on its own if it's unpredictable. This word is also used outside academia. There are some examples. For example, legislators nowadays want to control, regulate unpredictable AI systems. And my work is a categorization system for unpredictability to be used in future research regarding the topic. If we think about types of unpredictability, then one obvious unpredictable thing is randomness. So if you have a random number generator, that is unpredictable, of course, by definition. So that I will call stochastic unpredictability. Same input will yield different results. The program will yield different results with the same input. Then we have deterministic unpredictability or chaotic unpredictability. So the system is just so complex that you can't predict what it will do, but it will always do the same thing when you run it again. And then, of course, real world systems have both of these. So a language model, for example, there's a chaotic neural network that will deterministically give a probability distribution, and then you will sample tokens from it using stochastic methods. Unpredictability is not, you can't say really that a program is unpredictable. It always affects certain feature of the output or the input. So for example, if you have an image generator, then typically it is predictable on high level. So for example, if you give a DALL-E or whatever instructions to create a cat, then it will most probably create the image of cat. So it's predictable on high level, but then the small details are unpredictable. Maybe the breed of the cat, the style of the drawing, things like that cannot be predicted. On really low level, you can think individual colors and shapes are unpredictable. I think typically the more lower the level, the more unpredictable systems typically are, but that's maybe not what you want. Many people want systems to be unpredictable on high levels, but predictable on small levels. For example, maybe you want the drawing to have a specific type of cat, but then you want the system to make the cat in different situations and different in different teams, for example, to generate comics with the cat. So you want high level unpredictability, but not low. Unpredictability is also subjective. So maybe you learn over time to predict the system more. Depends on person, depends on how long the person has used the system. These things must be considered. Unpredictability is not necessarily related to creativity. Not everything unpredictable is creative. Of course, random noise is not creative, but also predictable things are an essential part of creativity. So for example, an artist can have a predictable style, that is fine. But of course, some unpredictability is needed to make a creative tool. Okay, thank you.
And that was before time. Get extra round of applause for being right on time. So we have time for a question now. Would anyone like to ask? Yeah, here we go.
Thanks for the talk. How do you imagine this framework being used in a CC system?
Yes, so I imagine that if you have a system, for example, consider you have a music accompaniment system. So you play along with the computer musical piece. Then of course you need some kind of unpredictability in order for it to create novel and surprising things, but you also need predictable parts in order to trust the system, be able to play along with it. So especially in co-creative systems, it's important to decide where to apply unpredictability and where not to apply unpredictability.
Something for the designers of the system to consider.
Yes.
Cool, thanks.
And let's get one more applause for Ika. And he'll be staying up here to present our next paper as well. And the next paper is entitled Many Meanings of Intentionality, a brief disambiguation for computational creativity.
So intentionality, we have all heard this word, and my colleague Simo Linkola and I were discussing this, and we noticed that people actually use it in several different meanings. So it has homonyms. One obvious meaning we all know is this goal directness meaning, that the system has intentions or goals. But another meaning is this aboutness. It's like concept in philosophy. And since CC is a multidisciplinary field, there are people from different backgrounds. We think that it's important to be specific what to mean with this word, because different people understand the word different. So this aboutness, also sometimes called directness, means that mental states are about something. They mean something. And of course, if you generate language or works of art or anything, then they also mean something, because humans are intentional, so they can create meaning. And also other people can interpret things. For example, the Chinese room experiment is intended to measure this intentionality. So Charles thought that computers are not intentional and tried to explain with Chinese room why this is the case. There are several people who disagree, so, and not really philosophical consensus on what is required for intentionality or aboutness, but still it is considered an important aspect of intelligent systems. Often when we speak about communication, we speak about communicative intent or authorial intent, what is like the original meaning of the text intended by the author. And this is often related to goals or intentions, but still it's about meaning, so about intentionality. If you have a theory of mind, you can maybe try to deduce what other people mean when they say things. If you have a system that is not intentional, like a language model, then you can't really you can't really know what they mean, because they don't mean anything. Do creative works have to have cognitive intent is debated. Goal directness is whole another concept here defined by Ventura, a fact of being deliberative or purposive that is output of the system. It's a result of the system having a goal or objective. The system's product correlates with its process. Goal directness is a concept in psychology and cognitive science. It's separate from aboutness in the sense that, yeah, many systems have goals. It's obvious a language model has a goal. Its goal is to produce text probabilities that describe the previous tokens, produce text relevant to the previous tokens. And of course, many other systems have a lot of other goals, and they don't need to be intentional. The goals don't need to mean anything in the philosophical sense. So basically, if you talk about this intentionality, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the aboutness intentionality. Conclusions. Yeah, man, there are different definitions of terms, different fields use terms differently. In philosophy, in cognitive science, in psychology, in computational creativity. Be specific what you mean when you use a term. We noticed that some papers that have been published in this conference, like use the word intentionality in some meaning, and then cite a paper that seems to use the word in another meaning. So it seems there's confusion. And yeah, we hope that this presentation was helpful to everyone. We don't intend to blame you for misusing the term. That's okay. We are confused as well. Just we wanted to make this disambiguation for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ika. It's very nice to see two different parts of your work in both presentations. We have time for one quick question. Yes, hand raised here. Last one last. Oh no, that was you. Yeah. Okay. So I'll. Did you also have a question? No.
Yeah, I'm asking, I thought it was Nadia because the question I'm going to do is actually. So yeah, I was thinking a bit about the relationship between intentionality and motivation. And about motivation, I was thinking about curiosity and goal directness that we've been talking with Nadia. But yeah, what I want to ask specifically is, do you think there can be intentionality without motivation and motivation without intentionality?
Motivation. I must admit that now I'm not really sure what these concepts like motivation mean in this context. And basically, it's one part of this problem. I think that if we think about goals, and maybe these goals can be justified by motivations, you can do these things without having like the philosophical intentionality, because goals can be like, you can make abstract goals in a mathematical system without them being like connected to the outside world. So this philosophical intentionality is about symbols being about some things in outside world. You can make a mathematical system with goals and motivations and whatsoever without them being connected to anything. It's like a purely like symbolic system. But if you want to make an intentional system, then it somehow needs to connect symbols in the system to objects in the real world.
Great. Let's give Iko another round of applause for his two talks. And next up, we have Carolyn Lamb, who will be presenting a lightning talk entitled, Should We Have Seen the Coming Storm? Transformers, Society, and CC.
All right, hello, everybody. So congratulations. After years of toiling in obscurity, all of a sudden, the thing we've been working on is the thing that everyone is freaking out about. Now, of course, this is not literally us, unless there's someone from OpenAI in the audience who I was not aware of, but this is all close enough to what we're doing that in the eyes of the general public, they're not going to see a difference.
So people are suing each other, people are going on strike about it. The US Congress is holding hearings, desperately trying to figure out what to do about copyright for generative AI. And let me tell you, in addition to being a computer scientist, I am also a science fiction author. And when I talk to my fiction writing colleagues, they are panicking. They are very angry. And so are the visual artists that I know. And it all kind of gives me this mood. This has been my mood lately. So Dan and I did a little literature review just of the last few years of ICCC papers. So this graph on the left here is the amount of people at ICCC and the relevant domains who have been using different forms of neural networks. The red stripe there at the bottom is people who are directly using transformer models. So even though I said this is not us, like you can see from the red stripe, it is us a little bit. We are part of the development that's happening here. And at a sharply increasing rate these past couple of years. And on the right here, what I have is the number of papers from the same data set that have made any mention at all of these specific ethical, social, economic, and legal issues that everyone in the aforementioned news has been freaking out about. So as you can see, I mean, this isn't zero, it's some people. There are people here who have been working on these problems, but it's not very many. It's not increasing at the rate you see in the left-hand graph. And for the most part, these are people who are just kind of doing their own thing, and their recommendations have not been taken up by the broader community. So definitely read the whole short paper because I have a lot more, we have a lot more analysis there and more recommendations than I could really fit into 5 minutes. But the point that I really want to make here is we need to fix this. We are, most of us, academics, I think. So we're supposed to be the people who are like on the side of open science and on the side of science, which is hopefully more ethical because it goes through a research ethics board and because it's not necessarily motivated by profit. We need to be the ones who are stepping up in this situation and figuring out what to do. So if we are wanting to use transform models and figure out what we can do with them, that's fine, but it needs to be something we are doing carefully and critically to a much greater extent than we've been doing the past few years. And if we are deciding not to use them, if we are going off and doing something else, then we're still not off the hook, because in that case, we need to be making the case why this other thing we're doing is actually a better social and ethical way of addressing these generative techniques. But either way, failure to engage with what's going on and with what people are seeing in the news about our research area is not an option. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Definitely a very timely, relevant topic for everyone. We have time for a quick question. Yes, here. Hand up quickly.
Yeah, it was quickly because I just wanted to give you more time, I guess. So Mike, if I have to turn it into a question, you mentioned check the paper to see if some of our recommendations. If you could give just one suggestion with this.
All right, well, I have a few on the slide that I didn't say out loud yet. These are the main ones. So this first recommendation on the slide, this is straight from Bender et al., who wrote a very famous critique of language models a few years ago. And the biggest thing we need to be doing is aligning our research goals around stakeholders. So stakeholders mean people, for example, if we are writing a storytelling system, what is the value of this system to people who are already writing stories? Is this system going to help them? Or is it going to disrupt things so completely that they no longer have a job? To me, at least, that second option is not desirable. Some of you may have a different opinion, but does that help?
Wonderful. Let's have one more big round of applause for Carolyn Lamb. And now we'll move on to our last talk of this session. It is a remote talk by Ken DeJuernel. I'm sorry for the mispronunciation. And the title is of the talk is Bias in Favor or Against Computational Creativity, a survey and reflection on importance of socio-cultural context in its evaluation.
Hello everyone, my name is Ken DeJuernel. I'm a researcher at CNRS in France. I'm very sorry not to be in the room here with you, but I'm very glad to still be able to present to you the works that I did with Bob Sturm from KTH in the scope of his European research project called Mosaic. The paper this presentation is about is halfway between a survey paper and a position paper about the importance of sociocultural context when considering perceptual human biases in the evaluation of computational creativity. I think this paper can be very useful to everyone who at some point will need to evaluate a creative system or will want to study perceptual biases regarding AI. So I really hope this presentation will make you want to read our paper. But first, let me define the scope of this paper. Here we are only considering perceptual biases. We are not talking about the biases that can be embedded or found into creative systems. So very generally speaking, human perceptions can be biased by many different factors such as personal factors, age, genre, etc., cultural factors, knowledge, context, etc. And when we are talking about the perception of computer decision or computer generation, we can also study biases through the lens of what is called algorithmic aversion or algorithmic appreciation, in which case other factors come into account. These factors are algorithmic factors, for example, the explainability of the algorithm, how it is presented, how accurate it is, etc. Prior familiarity with computers and AI, high-level factors such as by whom algorithms are being used, for instance, bank, for-profit organization, etc. And finally, task factors. What are the algorithms used for? And all of these perceptual biases is what we are talking about here. Alright, so the first part of the paper consists of a review of 27 papers in which one or several perceptual studies have been conducted with quantitative results on the existence of perceptual bias in the evaluation of computational creativity. Basically, what we are considering here are studies that are trying to answer the question, do belief or knowledge of involvement of computational creativity in the production of an artifact influences one's appreciation of it? We are considering 4 domains of applications: music, graphics and images, poetry, and journalism. This is in order to have a good representation of different media types and also to have both artistic and factual scopes represented. So here you can see the list of all the papers, to the best of our knowledge, which conducted such a study with style and topic and reported conclusions. Details regarding the scope and methodology of each of these studies are given in our paper. The main point that I want to show here is that by looking at the reported conclusion, it is pretty clear that we are in a situation where we do not have any consensus. Many studies find existence of such biases, and many studies cannot find one. And this is true for all domain of applications. So where do we go from here? An interesting thing is that many of these studies got mixed results and found that the existence of bias in favor or against computational creativity is actually modulated by various sociocultural factors. And this leads us to the second part of our paper, where we take a look on the importance of sociocultural context in the evaluation of computational creativity. So we have categorized these factors upon three main categories, and we provide evidence of these modulating factors with examples from inside and outside the realm of computational creativity. The first category that we are considering is contextual factors. There is empirical proof that knowledge of extra-artistic factors influences the way we are perceiving art. For instance, the setting in which a perceptual test takes place, whether it is in a lab setting or in a museum, for instance, can yield completely opposite results, as shown in Chamberlain et al. Another example is that the order of appearance in a music competition has been shown to give performances occurring at the end of the competition a significant unfair advantage. And finally, external knowledge or even external belief of external factors such as whether a painting or a composition has been created by a student or an expert artist, that skews significantly how one appreciates the artifact. This is a title of a paper called "But They Told Me It Was Professional." The second main category that we are considering is the culture and expertise of a participant in regards to its relation with the style of topic that is being studied. First, it is very important to realize that the definition and conceptual boundaries of what can be considered creative is very much culture dependent. And second, as shown by many studies, cultural familiarity and expertise affect perception of an artifact down to even very specific characteristic of this artifact. For instance, in the realm of music, it has been shown that the perception of what is or what is not considered a dissonant interval, so even very basic stuff, are affected by cultural familiarity and expertise. And finally, as shown by Dada and Cross, cultural familiarity and expertise are very often intertwined with each other and form a very complex system, which makes them very difficult to study separately. The third category that we are considering is about one's relationship with the product and the process. So you are probably all already familiar with the 4 P's of creativity model that was introduced by Rhodes and made popular in our community thanks to Anna Jordanus. But just in case, let me remind it for you. The idea is that creativity entails 4 components: a person, a human, a group, a computer, a group of computers, etc., whatever, engage in a creative process in order to produce a product, which so far I've called artifact. And all of these elements are taking place in a social-cultural environment called the press. But anyway, why is it important for perceptual bias? Well, first, different cultures and practices will focus more or less on the final product itself, or rather more or less on the process that lead to this product. This leads to the fact that knowledge or even belief in what process has been used changes completely our perception of the product and how we engage with it. For example, Clément Canon's work shows that we do not listen to the same way whether we believe we are listening to a composition or to an improvisation. We are not focusing at all on the same musical characteristics. And finally, being able to engage or observe the process taking place in front of our eyes can totally change how we appreciate an artifact. This is shown, by example, in Chamberlain et al., where they found opposing results whether participants observed a robot painter creating an art piece in front of them or not. So what can we learn from all of this? And how should we proceed going forward to improve our knowledge and understanding of these biases? So we conclude our paper by proposing some safeguards inspired by qualitative research methodology. And so first, we advise using triangulation as a means of verifying both the data and interpretations. The idea here is to use multiple sources of data and different evaluation methods. For instance, conducting surveys or interviews on top of a quantitative result. For example, one thing that we did in previous work was to ask participants about their strategies for discriminating between human and AI authorship. Second, if you can, we strongly advise to closely align the research context with the artistic relevant environment. This applies to both the content of stimuli, which should be as natural as possible regarding the style and topic, and the environment in which the stimuli are observed. Third, use thick descriptions. You cannot overspecify. This helps to understand the specifics in order to compare the research context of a study with those of another study. And if you can, all the potential modulating factors that we have mentioned previously should be clearly stated. I recommend reading through Ponterotto's paper for advice on how to write thick descriptions. And finally, please do not get trapped in the pitfall of generalization. It is very easy to do so, and that should be avoided at all costs, of course. Social behavioral phenomena, they are bound to the specific context and should only be reported within this context. So, what does it entail for future research in computational creativity? Well, the bad news, I guess, is that for the evaluation of creative system, if you want to take into consideration perceptual biases, you'll need to find, or more realistically, to design a specific study regarding the specific context of your system. But we can see the silver lining of that as a whole for the community. We have here fantastic experimental ground to develop many studies in many different contexts to understand the why and wherefores of algorithmic aversion or algorithmic appreciation in the scope of creativity. And if you want to conduct a study on bias in the evaluation of computational creativity, great, join the team. But I think now it is maybe time to move on from the question, does these biases exist? And maybe we should, as a community, more focus on the what, the where, the when, with whom, and how do they appear, these biases. So to conclude, I really hope that this paper will help the community to conduct great future research that will lead to a better understanding on the impact of creative systems in society and help inform further discussions in regard to AI and ethics. Thank you very much for your attention. Once again, I'm very sorry not to be here with you in person, but let us not let that hinder our chance to discuss further. You have here on the screen my email address and website. Do not hesitate to be in touch for questions, comments, long discussions across the web, or ideas of collaboration. Have a great week at the conference. Take care. Bye.
Great, and I think that we have a Ken live, so we can take a quick question from the audience. Any questions? Yes, thanks. Sorry.
Hello, Ken. Thank you for that talk, and the paper looks excellent as well. In your summary there, you had the who, what, where, when, and how. You didn't have the why. And I think your paper, from a quick skim, it looks like it answers the why to some extent, but I wanted to give you a chance to talk about why a bit more, or if you want to say it shouldn't be included.
No, you're right. I think it really very much should be included. I wouldn't go to the extent to say that we completely solve the question in our paper, even though we try in some part, I guess. So yeah, but I guess for the why, it's an area where I'm not necessarily very competent, as I am not a cognitive scientist. I don't work on music or on art perception. But yeah, I think it's also due to the fact that computational creativity is still creativity, and pieces that are created by creative system are still products, and therefore human biases will also occur to them. So it is expected to have this kind of similar attitude in regard to the fact that it will be modulated by many factors. And the only difference really, I guess, is like all these algorithmic factors that we can see through the scope of algorithmic aversion or appreciation. And it is this is one of the things that we try also to describe in the paper, is that how these specificities add to the already there biases, human biases about art. I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you. And thank you for the nice presentation. I'd like us to give everyone, all of our speakers, a final round of applause. And I believe we are going directly into the next panel. Is that right?
Thanks, Janet. And I have to say, thanks to Janet for keeping us on time. This is not an easy skill. We are going to set up for the panel, the industry panel that Dr. Maya Ackerman is going to be leading. We're going to give you a 5 or 7 minute washroom break now, but we'll come back at maybe 5:05 to get that set up. So don't lose your seat, but do have a pee.
Just before you go, just wait 10 seconds, okay? Because for those of you who have kindly attended my birthday in 2017 and 2019, which has been co-located with ICCC, you know what I'm going to do next, right? So I'll take a selfie with you. Thanks.